Hey everyone, hope you're all doing great. Welcome back to the Anime Fictions 2.0. Today, we're diving into part 5 of What If Naruto selected for Team 8. If you're enjoying these alternate timelines, make sure to hit that subscribe button, share it with your friends, and check out the other videos on the channel. And of course, drop your thoughts in the comments. I always love hearing your ideas. Alright, enough talk, let's get into the story. On his way to the hospital, Naruto cursed sulfurously when a clone's memories suddenly surged into his mind. The clone had been cutting through the hot springs carrying a bag of carryout from the dango shop when it was dispersed. Hinata had hesitantly asked if they could try something besides ramen the previous day, causing Naruto to smack himself on the forehead. He tended to get into a routine with his improvised lunch arrangements, and forgot that not everyone was as crazy as he was about his favorite food. Of course, Hinata immediately thought he was upset at her instead of himself. Naruto shook his head. It had taken the rest of his afternoon visit to convince her that he wasn't angry with her. This was complicated by a growing sense of rage he felt toward her so-called family. Now that he had a rough idea of what life was like in the Hyuga clan, it was easier for him to see how it had twisted his friend. Now he was doubly angry. His clone had seen a white-haired old man crouch down in front of the fence that screened the women's bathing area. The creepy old pervert was emitting a high-pitched giggle that made Naruto's skin crawl, even in memory. Disgusted, the clone demanded to know what he was doing there. No sooner had the words left the ersatz Naruto's mouth than there was a loud pop and the old pervert was now facing him, sitting on top of a massive orange toad. The toad's mouth cracked open and an enormously long tongue shot out and wrapped itself around the clone's waist. "You keep making so much noise, you're going to get me caught," the white-haired old man said in a dismissive tone. There was a glimpse of a horned forehead protector holding back the white mane. "Ninja? Wearing wooden geta on his feet? Why don't you cool off?" the strange shinobi asked, and the disgustingly slimy tongue flexed and whipped the clone off its feet and into the aqueduct that fed into the bathhouse. Unfortunately, the impact with the water was hard enough to disperse the clone. Its last memory was flinging the bag of dango away from the canal. Naruto scowled and immediately summoned 10 more clones. Without a word, they took off for the hot springs to reclaim the dango and keep an eye out for a white-haired older man in olive robes and a red overjacket. When he was still 2 blocks from the hospital, his mood became even more disgusted. His clones didn't find anything near the hot springs, aside from a lot of angry-looking women. Of course, one of them assumed the green-clad boys were there to peep as well, and they'd been attacked and dispersed before they could ask a single question. Naruto saw a bakery right across the street from where he was standing, but he knew the owners hated him on sight. Even if they deigned to serve him, he didn't want Hinata eating anything they knew was being sold to the demon boy. He sighed and ducked into an alley. One quick hinge later, he looked like a blonde version of Kiba, without the facial tattoos. He strode out of the alley and crossed the street toward the bakery. Ordinarily, he wouldn't want to support their stupid business in any way, but this was for Hinata. Naruto was just leaving the hospital when one of the chunin that assisted the Hokage caught up to him. "Naruto-san, the Hokage would like to see you as soon as possible," the young man said in an oddly respectful tone. Naruto frowned. It was almost time for his next session with Gai-sensei. Well, there wasn't anything he could do about it. He created another clone and instructed it to find Gai-sensei and tell him Naruto had been summoned to the Hokage's office. Naruto turned back to the chunin, who looked slightly disconcerted, and simply said, "Let's go." The chunin set a brisk pace, but Naruto wished they could get there sooner. He had no idea what Ji-san wanted, but the way this day had gone so far, it probably wasn't good. At least Hinata had liked the sweet bean buns. Sakura stared after Naruto and the chunin as they hurried down the street. Ino had to elbow her twice to get her attention, which almost sparked an argument. The word Inopig was about to leave her lips when she caught herself. Rebuilding a relationship with her former best friend was more work than she'd imagined. It was a little disturbing how ingrained some of her more aggressive reactions had become. It was one thing to realize that you weren't a very nice person, but doing something about it was quite another. Instead, she made an effort to smile at her old friend. Ino returned it, a little tentatively. "Was that Naruto?" the blonde asked. Sakura nodded. "I think so," she answered. Ino frowned. She seemed a little ambivalent where their former classmate was concerned. Not that Sakura had much room to talk. Things had been simpler at the academy. Uzumaki Naruto was the class clown and an incessant prankster. He was really irritating, but it was also reassuring in a way. You could always predict what he'd do in a given situation. It was always ramen or Hokage that. He was safe. Sakura had seen another side of him during the exams. His advice to Lee was something that still stung in her memory, mostly because it was true. Then the terrifying fight against that grass ninja, when Naruto's team jumped in without hesitation. Even worse was the attack by the Sound Genin team, and the terrifying auras enveloping Naruto and Sasuke when they woke up. However, the biggest shock of all was during the preliminary matches. She'd wanted to cringe when Sasuke had brought up Hinata's defeat. Even if it was a valid tactic, it dishonored someone that had fought to defend him when he was unconscious. But she hadn't even had time to make a face before Naruto had decisively ended the match. Where was the class clown now? Sasuke refused to talk about the match, even after the bandage was removed from his jaw. But when a disappointed-looking Kakashi-sensei announced they were starting extra training sessions, Sasuke threw himself into the lessons with a disturbing intensity. "I heard he goes to visit her every day," Ino said in a faint voice. "Who?" Sakura asked, jolted out of her reverie. "One of the ladies visiting the shop complained that she's seen him at the hospital every day this week," Ino clarified. "He must be visiting Hinata." That was rather nice, Sakura concluded. She wondered if Sasuke would visit her in the hospital if she had been injured. She shook her head after a moment's thought. No, he wouldn't. Not if he had the option of training. Sakura made an effort to change the subject and turned to Ino, asking her if Chuji or Shikamaru were nervous about their upcoming matches. Listening to her old friend rant about her teammates was a balm to uneasy nerves. It was good to have her back. Yuhi Kurenai had just finished summarizing her notes when the messenger from the Hokage arrived. She took the message from the young Chunin with a nod and opened it. It was a polite request for her to report to the Hokage's tower at her earliest convenience. On an impulse, she decided to take her notes with her. She had little doubt the hidden sand would come up in their discussion, and she might need to reference the reports she'd gathered. She knew the sand had been under close surveillance since she'd made her original report, but he or his Jonin sensei must have sensed the watchers. They'd done nothing suspicious, but they were still shinobi. The lack of suspicious activity was itself cause for concern. Kurenai stretched her shoulders and twisted her back to loosen it up as she began walking to the center of the village. She'd been at this for days, but the safety of Naruto and Shino demanded no less. It was unfortunate that she'd been forced to miss watching Gaara's fight with Rock Lee. From Mato Gai's description of the match, the Suna Genin had incredibly formidable defenses, even though he'd been unable to match Lee's speed for most of the battle. More disturbing were reports from Mitarashi Enko concerning the crushed bodies she'd discovered in the aptly named Forest of Death. The cause of death was catastrophic blunt trauma, though the masses of sand filling the crushed victims' noses and throats would have killed them almost as quickly. Only remnants of the sand remained, but the ruptures and distension of the oral and nasal cavities suggested they had once been packed full of sand. All the evidence suggested this was the handiwork of Sabaku no Gaara. The fact that the genin was a killer was not lost on Kurenai. While a few deaths were considered unavoidable in the constant skirmishing during the second exam, the fact remained that this Gaara person seemed to have no compunctions regarding the taking of human life. Moreover, given the defenses Guy described, it was more than likely that Gaara's victims had no way of even hurting the sand genin. The overall psychological profile she managed to develop was just as grim. The political implications of the Kazekage entering such a dangerous predator into Konoha's Chunin exam were just as ugly. However, that was the Hokage's job to evaluate. Hers was to get him the most accurate information possible. Kurenai had just gone over her data on Gaara when Naruto arrived. "Hokage-sama, sensei," Naruto greeted them with a polite bow, before quietly sitting in the other chair. Kurenai raised an eyebrow, wondering if she was being set up for another prank. Then she noticed out of the corner of her eye the old man's expression of stark disbelief. Maybe the joke wasn't on her this time. "Ah, Naruto," the Hokage said after a moment. "I read your sensei's report regarding the events that occurred during the second exam. You said that you actually spoke to it?" Naruto nodded soberly, and Kurenai was inwardly pleased that he was taking this seriously. "I didn't like the idea of someone placing another seal on me. He said it could have effects on my mind, and he didn't want his vessel being controlled by someone else. Also, The seal's chakra was interfering with both my chakra and the fox's chakra. Naruto paused, scratching his head. He was really a jerk about it, but I think he was actually worried. Sandaime puffed on his pipe while he digested this. Kurenai was a little disconcerted at the idea of the Kyuubi being worried about anything. It was like hearing about a typhoon with hurt feelings. And you were able to remove Orochimaru's seal by forcing your chakra into it? Naruto nodded. Mine, but mostly the fox's chakra. It hurt right up until the stupid thing exploded, her student explained, unconsciously clutching his right forearm. It's sort of like when you get a really infected pimple, so you squeeze the skin around it until it pops. It hurts the worst right before it explodes all over. Yes, thank you, Naruto, Kurenai said quickly. She'd had her share of blemishes when she was younger, and had no desire to be reminded of all the gory details, no matter how apt a metaphor it might be. She glanced quickly toward the Hokage, but the old man was merely nodding thoughtfully. As the seal has worked constantly since you were a baby, the steady flow of chakra no doubt enlarged your coils, reinforcing them. That's why the pressure didn't rupture them. He nodded. Naruto, since then, have you noticed any changes with respect to the seal or your prisoner? Naruto shrugged, looking a little uncomfortable. Not really. Sometimes I feel the red chakra a little easier when I'm mad at something, but I think that started before the Chunin exam. The Hokage nodded gravely. That doesn't sound too bad, Naruto, provided you keep your temper under control. I know you didn't ask for this responsibility, but you need to make sure there are not any accidents. Kurenai knew the Hokage was definitely hinting about the upcoming finals, but hoped he didn't press the point. Hyuga Niji's behavior during his match with Hinata was just short of criminal, and her student's desire to return the favor was not something she disagreed with. On the other hand, if Naruto did get out of hand, some might seek to use that. Still, better to not belabor the point, or else Naruto might think they were more interested in protecting the Hyuga prodigy. Fortunately, the Hokage was satisfied with Naruto's quick nod. I've also asked a former student of mine to return to Konoha. With all the people looking for him, I actually expected him before now. Apparently he was delayed. In any event, Jiraiya is an expert on seals, and he helped the fourth develop some of the techniques that went into the seal placed on you, Naruto. He is probably the person most qualified to make sure the seal hasn't been damaged in any way. Kurenai's eyebrows lifted when she realized who the Hokage was referring to. There was a knock at the door, and one of the Chunin guards stuck his head inside. Jiraiya-sama is here, Hokage-sama, he said in a quietly reverent tone. From what little Kurenai had heard about the Hokage's legendary students, known throughout the land as the Sannin, it was more than merited. After a nod from the Hokage, the door opened all the way and a tall, broad-shouldered man strode into the room. He wore dull green robes over a mesh shirt that she could see glimpses of at the neck and wrists. On top of everything else, he wore an oversized red vest with a yellow circle over each breast. Our cake wouldn't get a clacked on the floor, but his stride exhibited the steadiness that spoke of long experience wearing them. The white hair suggested age, but his face was for the most part unlined. Kurenai estimated him to be in his 50s, a most dangerous age for shinobi. Without the energy of youth, some shinobi were content to slow down at that age, to make things easier. The more serious ones refused to concede anything to the passage of years, possibly even intensifying their training regimen. While maybe not as resilient as they once were, they stayed every bit as strong, and their accumulated experience made them far deadlier. Yuhi Kurenai did not need to guess into which category this man had fallen. She almost unconsciously straightened her spine. This was obviously a man worthy of respect. The fact that he was casually munching on a stick of dango only reinforced this impression. Not many would be comfortable acting so casually in the Hokage's office. Though she understood that Naruto was an exception to that rule. As if on cue, she heard her gen interrupt in sputters of outrage. "You no good bastard thief!" Naruto shouted, jumping up from his chair. "Naruto!" Kurenai snapped, too shocked at his reaction to do much more than gape. "He's still eating the evidence," Naruto snarled, pointing a finger in the man's face as he consumed the last of the sweet treat. "I bought that for Hinata-chan," he added angrily, as if that made it even more contemptible. Kurenai frowned. Jiraiya cocked his head and peered at Kurenai through hooded eyes. "Isn't he a little young for a girlfriend?" he asked. Naruto's shout of protest was ignored with a wave of the Sannin's hand. I just kept it from going to waste, Jiraiya replied casually, picking at his teeth with the dango stick. Your clone shouldn't have been so rude. Are you normally too lazy to run your own errands? He asked curiously. Naruto was red in the face, fists clenched, and emitting more than a small amount of killing intent. Kurenai was about to say something when she watched him visibly gather himself, opening his fists, and closing his eyes until his complexion was back to normal. When he opened his eyes again, their normal blue tint seemed more like winter ice than summer skies. My clone just wanted to know why you were peeping into the women's baths, Naruto replied in an icy tone. Kurenai spun toward Jiraiya, vaguely aware that there was now a kunai in her hand. Is this true? She asked in a deceptively mild voice. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the Hokage massaging his forehead with a pained expression. Of course not, Jiraiya blustered. I was doing research. Research on what? Kurenai asked calmly. Spying techniques. That's part of my cover, you know. No one takes a drunken old lecher seriously, so I can gather a lot of information with no one noticing. By the end of his explanation, he was clearly on a roll, chest puffed out and chin up. I'm willing to make any sacrifice necessary to serve Konoha, for I am Myoboku Mountain's monk of the Toad Spirits, also known as the Toad Hermit. With that he struck a dramatic pose that made Kurenai roll her eyes. Was this Hokage's expert? Jiraiya has sent back quite a bit of information, the Hokage said in a strained voice. It didn't escape Kurenai's attention that he hadn't commented on the rest of his former students' claims. I expected you at least a week ago, the Hokage continued, directing his attention toward Jiraiya now. What delayed you? Well, Jiraiya began, grimacing as he stretched his neck until it cracked. Someone had the brilliant idea to send this kid out to the border with Earth Country. I heard a few rumors as I was coming back and decided to chase them down. A renegade faction in Iwakugyo was putting out word they wanted to hire missing Nins for an assassination within Konoha. Normally, that would require a bank full of you, but since the target was only a genin, some of the more desperate mercenaries were getting interested. The Hokage scowled fiercely. This is getting completely out of hand, he said. Has something been done about them? Jiraiya nodded smugly. I had a few words with some contacts I maintain in the Tsuchikage's office, and they leaked the information to the right people. Iwakugyo doesn't want a war with Konoha, at least not this year. Almost in spite of herself, Kurenai felt a bit of gratitude toward the Sannin. The last thing Naruto needed right now was more people that wanted him dead. That's good, as long as no hint of your involvement gets out, the Hokage said in a worried tone. How reliable are these contacts of yours? Very, Jiraiya answered. They know I'm using them to some extent, but exposing this faction furthered their own interests as well. Besides, they are big fans of my work. Ah, the Hokage replied in a careful tone. That's useful, I suppose? Fans? Kurenai asked curiously as she slid the kunai back into its concealed sheath. Of my great literary works, Jiraiya responded in a grandiose manner. Humph, Naruto grunted. If it was written by you, it's probably a dirty book. Naruto! Kurenai snapped. Disreputable or not, this Jiraiya had done them no small service. It wouldn't be prudent to alienate him. On the other hand, as Jiraiya began to harangue Naruto about respecting his elders, Kurenai did notice an odd expression flicker across the Hokage's face. It was an odd mixture of guilt and amusement. My apologies, Jiraiya-sama, she said in a formal tone. My student is, as you can see, still upset. I am, however, fairly well read and I am curious to see if I may have read one of your books. What are their titles? I'm about to publish Ika Ika Paradise, Volume 7, Jiraiya announced proudly, ignoring the frantic waving of the Hokage's hands. The books with the orange covers? Kurenai asked, slipping the kunai back into her hand as the Hokage covered his eyes. Why yes, Jiraiya answered slyly. I can get you an advance copy, if you like. Naruto, Kurenai said through slightly clenched teeth. Would you mind waiting in the hallway for a moment? No, sensei, Naruto said quickly and scuttled out of the room. A distant portion of her mind wondered why he had gone so pale. Maybe he was even more disgusted than she was. Good idea, Jiraiya said with a leer that turned her stomach. Some things shouldn't be discussed around brats, at least not until they are older. Kurenai turned to glare at the older man. Sannin or not, she'd wondered about the source of Kakashi's disgusting books for a while now. I'm not sure what conversational topics you are referring to, but there are things I do not want a boy of that age exposed to. Among them is my opinion of the garbage you write. Jiraiya's mouth dropped open. He turned shocked eyes toward the Hokage, but out of the corner of her eye, Kurenai saw the old man looking down as he fiddled with his pipe. It's bad enough to even have those thoughts, to treat women as mere sex objects, but to publish them so others can revel in your perversity? Do you know how many times I've had to sit through joint meetings and listen to Hatake Kakashi, an otherwise skilled shinobi of the leaf, reading one of your books and giggling like an adolescent schoolgirl? Half of the people I deal with don't take me seriously because of the sexist ideas that infest our society, and here you are spreading the infection. Kurenai took a deep breath. This was an issue that had annoyed her for as long as she could remember, but this immature idiot was still a high-ranking shinobi who could help her student. Stabbing him, while highly satisfying, would not be prudent. Uzumaki Naruto, she said in a cold voice, has put up with a lot of crap in his life, little of it deserved. This village hates him for incredibly stupid reasons, yet he has persevered and exceeded even my expectations. If you do anything to damage that, or corrupt him in any way, you will answer to me, and Sannin or not, I will find a way to make you pay. Is that understood? Jiraiya's face went stony during her tirade, and Kurenai braced herself for an explosion of wounded male pride. Instead, he just cocked his head and cracked a lopsided grin. Little brat really got to you, didn't he? He asked. Things were a little calmer when Naruto was summoned back into the Hokage's office. While it was a relief to feel the tension was mostly gone, he was a little disappointed to find the old pervert unharmed. He didn't even want to think of what Kurenai-sensei would do to him if she caught him peeking into the women's baths. He wasn't even sure she had realized that she was holding a kunai in her hand, but the fact that the hand in question had been at waist level had made quite an impression on him. He was slightly self-conscious when the Toad Hermit told him to take off his jacket and t-shirt. If Kurenai-sensei and Hokage-sama weren't there, he might even have bolted. Who knew what kind of sick stuff the old pervert might be into? It didn't help that this Jiraiya guy couldn't keep from making comments once he was naked from the waist up. Damn, don't they feed kids here anymore? He asked with a smirk. It might help if he ate something besides ramen, Kurenai observed coolly. Naruto knew she was probably still irritated at this Jiraiya person, but now she was taking it out on him. Naruto's irritation spiked even higher when Jiraiya reached out and squeezed his bicep. Wiry, but he's still got some good muscle tone, the old man said speculatively. In addition to his normal missions and team training, he's been working with a taijutsu specialist, Kurenai observed. Very few shinobi train as hard as he does. Naruto willed his cheeks not to redden. It still felt good to hear his sensei acknowledge all his hard work. That's good, Jiraiya replied with a nod. But taijutsu is only part of being a shinobi. Taijutsu was an area that had been especially neglected by his instructors at the academy, Kurenai shot back. Improving that also improves the performance of his clones, which he is highly skilled with. I've also introduced them to basic of different types. However, given his situation, Naruto has experienced some unique challenges with respect to ninjutsu. Naruto frowned. Nay, sensei, I haven't blown up a tree in ages. It wouldn't hurt to remind them that he was right here after all. Nonetheless, you almost did yourself a serious injury with a very basic technique, Kurenai replied. Oh, I've got to hear this, Jiraiya said with a grin. Naruto scowled as Kurenai explained his little mishap with the ratio. While she didn't go out of her way to make him sound stupid, the smiles and chuckles from Jiraiya and the Hokage were getting on his nerves. But the old creep looked thoughtful when she explained how Naruto had to consciously withhold chakra to keep from overloading his. Things may be farther along than I anticipated. Okay, brat, I want you to mold some chakra. Don't do anything with it, just mold it. Naruto did as he was told, but he almost lost his focus when Jiraiya leaned forward to stare at his stomach. Naruto looked down and saw the elaborate 8-lobed seal had become visible around his navel. Keep it steady, Jiraiya ordered as his eyes narrowed. After a while, the old pervert straightened up and told Naruto he could relax. It looks like everything is intact. None of the elements appear to be breaking down, but it's advanced a little farther than I expected. Advanced? Kurenai asked quickly. The seal was designed to let the Kyuubi's chakra leak out and slowly mix with Naruto's, Jiraiya explained. Done gradually enough, this would allow his body to adjust and absorb the chakra into his own reserves. As he grew, the constant pressure enlarged his coils, even as they were reinforced to handle the extra load. Now, from what I can see, these passages were designed to slowly expand as Naruto aged, to increase the rate at which he can access this chakra. Otherwise, the Kyuubi could have flooded him too quickly when he was younger, and either damaged his coils or tried to influence him. Naruto gulped. The passages are dilated more than I expected to see at his age. On the other hand, from what I can see, his coils are also better developed, so it's still under control. You need to get a Hyuga or someone to seriously check out his coils, but I think the seal is adapting to Naruto's own development, the old man said with a grin. That has to be my student's finest work, he added, the pride in his voice unmistakable. You taught the fourth? Naruto demanded. The fourth Hokage, savior of Konoha, was taught by a pervert? I'll have Hinata do an evaluation when she's released from the hospital, Kurenai said, her expression unreadable. She's a Hyuga? Jiraiya asked. Then he winked at Naruto. Not bad, kid. She's not my girlfriend, Naruto said quickly, remembering Jiraiya's earlier remark. She's my teammate. The Hokage cleared his throat. Well, it's good to hear that we don't have anything to worry about, he said. And it looks like Naruto will continue to grow stronger if he keeps this up. Though he may always have some issues with respect to having too much chakra. Naruto shrugged, but an idea had taken root in the back of his mind. Time for some payback. I think I already know all the I need. Taijutsu is much more useful anyway. That earned him a sharp look from Kurenai, but the old hermit simply exploded. Is that what you think, you little brat? I can show you things that will make your hair stand on end, permanently. I think that's an excellent idea, the Hokage said quickly. Given his reserves, Naruto could use some assistance learning more advanced than is normally taught to genin. Jiraiya's eyes bulged in their sockets. Hey! He already has a sensei, he objected. Kurenai is a specialist, an area in which I understand that Naruto's attributes mean he is especially challenged. The Hokage replied, lighting his pipe again. It requires a certain delicacy to the chakra manipulations, and his control is still not up to that level, Kurenai explained with an apologetic look toward Naruto. He is, however, amazingly talented at dispelling. Not to mention that Kurenai also has a third gen that Naruto could possibly fight in the finals, the Hokage added. It would be somewhat awkward if she were to spend significantly more time with one student than the other. Naruto could smell a con job a mile away. Don't worry about it, he said dismissively. I'd rather spend more time with Gai-sensei if he'll let me. He's a really good teacher and I know I'll learn more useful things than I could with this pervert. Jiraiya rounded on Naruto, his face the picture of outrage. Is that what you think? He demanded. Put your clothes back on and follow me. After Naruto followed Jiraiya out of the office, Kurenai turned to the Hokage. That was very neat, she observed. The old man chuckled. Sannin or not, I've known him since he was a boy. Naruto did most of the work though. You've really done wonders with him. Kurenai allowed herself a slight smile. I can't take too much credit. He's always been exceedingly clever. But then she thought of Hinata, and the smile bled off of her face. I think he's going to need it though. Is there something you'd like to report? The Hokage asked in a delicate tone. Officially? Kurenai replied. No. Unofficially, I think Naruto has had some things confirmed that I've been suspecting. It will be challenging for him to deal with this knowledge, since the wrongdoer is far too politically connected to answer for his crimes. But that's just the way things are, isn't it? Better he learn that sooner than later. Her bitterness was unmistakable. She felt a flash of guilt when the Hokage winced. I can still open an inquiry, he offered, but with no new evidence, the outcome will be useless, Kurenai admitted. Worse, some will see this as politically motivated and use that against you. And if they discover that you were the instigator of the investigation, the Hokage added, letting his voice trail off. Kurenai frowned. Yes, that would be enough justification to demand she be transferred to another. I think he'd do that just to spite both of us. If you can think of another way to address this, please let me know, Sarutobi added before taking a thoughtful puff on his pipe. I don't think there is, Kurenai said in a pained voice. And that's the lesson Naruto has to learn from all this. But I don't think it's one he will accept. By the time they quit later that evening, Naruto had to admit the old pervert knew his. He proved this by ordering Naruto to show him a technique he knew, and then had him stand back. After Naruto demonstrated Doton, Wana, causing a training log to sink a couple of feet into the ground, the toad hermit made a series of seals and exclaimed Doton, Yomi Numa. Instantly, the ground fell away in front of the toad hermit, the hole filling with water. The so-called swamp of the underworld engulfed half the training ground, undermining trees, submerging equipment, and generally creating havoc. Naruto found himself drooling. He'd never seen anything so beautiful. He imagined using that on an unwary pursuit team chasing his friends and shivered. What were the seals for that one again? He asked in a reverent tone. In the end, they worked out a compromised schedule. Naruto continued working with Guy and Lee in the morning, had lunch with Hinata-chan at the hospital while she was still being treated, and then spent the afternoons and early evenings with the toad hermit. Jiraiya preferred that division, since he said he wasn't a morning person. Since Naruto always saw him heading off toward Konoha's Red Lantern district after their training sessions, he had a pretty good idea of why. Naruto was a little hesitant to tell Guy-sensei that he wouldn't be working with them in the afternoons anymore, but the minute Jiraiya's name left his mouth, Guy was most enthusiastic about the change. Naruto could only assume Guy knew the Toad Hermit, or at least of his reputation, which made Naruto begin to wonder about the old man. Maybe he wasn't as flaky as he acted, sort of like Guy-sensei at the hospital. In any event, he made the most of this more limited training time, fighting Rock Lee head-on, rather than trying to always outlast him. It was mostly pretty painful, but he did cherish the few times he managed to knock his friend on his butt. A couple of days into this new routine, Kurenai invited him and Shino over for dinner at her house. Naruto arrived at the small homestead, somewhat curious as to her purpose. He hoped it wasn't to talk about Hinata. The things she told him were said in confidence, and it wouldn't feel right to repeat them, even to Shino and Kurenai. Shino was just walking up to the front door when Naruto arrived. Superficially, the Aburame Genin looked the same as always. However, Guy had been coaching him and Lee on how to evaluate an opponent's body language. Shino's stride seemed tighter, more controlled, and his center of gravity never deviated as he walked. Naruto didn't doubt that Shino's mother had really been working on his weapon skills. Shino acknowledged Naruto's wave with a barely perceptible nod before Naruto knocked on the door. Their sensei opened the door and showed them into her home. Naruto muttered the traditional pleasantries that Hinata had drilled him on as they walked to the Aburame household, but Kurenai merely waved them off. He looked around curiously. The house was comfortable, he supposed was the best word to describe it. The furniture was simple, but well maintained, and everything was arranged in an orderly fashion. There were a few pictures on the walls, mostly of an older couple he guessed were her parents. The only picture of his sensei was in a faded group shot that he guessed was her old team, along with a burly man who had to be Cobra Sensei. Kurenai showed him and Shino into the dining room and gestured for them to sit down. Naruto was surprised to see the table piled with papers and scrolls. A few cardboard containers were piled haphazardly on a side table, but they did smell good. I picked up some takeout dinners from Moritex, Kurenai explained as she passed them each a box and sat down. I figured we could eat while I go over my findings. Naruto carefully set aside his dinner, and curiously opened the top folder on the pile in front of him. Inside was a stack of papers, topped with a picture of Hyuga Niji. And that pretty much sums up all the competitors in the Chunin examination finals, with two exceptions, Kurenai said as she concluded her presentation. Naruto and myself, Shino replied. Yes, Kurenai agreed. She was pleasantly surprised at how attentive her audience was. There was something to be said for mortal peril with respect to sharpening one's focus. I assume the two of you know each other fairly well, so that would be wasted effort. Furthermore, these reports contain a fair amount of speculation and guesswork on my part, based on the available data. And you do not wish to inadvertently compromise anything either of us has told you in confidence, Shino added. Naruto nodded. No doubt his recent conversations with Hinata had made him especially sensitive to such concerns. That is correct, Kurenai confirmed. Naruto shrugged. I won't do anything to kill your bugs, Shino. It would be inappropriate for me to expect you to hold back, Naruto, Shino replied, straightening his dark glasses. Naruto grinned. You told me they can't really drain my chakra too well. They keep getting full and falling off. I can utilize them to consume flesh as well as chakra, Shino informed him. The former, however, is not usually necessary, and the utilization of anthropophagus techniques against nominal allies is contraindicated for a rank progression match. Naruto made a face. Are you trying to get the tent to yourself, next time we go camping? Kurenai cleared her throat very loudly. I want both of you to do your best, she told them, but I also do not want to see either of you inflicting permanent injuries on each other. Is that understood? Naruto nodded. I'm saving all that for Niji, he declared with a wide grin. Shino adjusted his glasses again. The repeated gesture betrayed his agitation to anyone who knew him well. Kurenai wondered if she should ask him how he felt about the matchups for the final. He wasn't visibly distressed that Naruto would get to fight Niji first, but sometimes she wondered. After a moment, Shino spoke again. If I am overmatched in one of my fights, I will endeavor to drain as much of their chakra before I am defeated. This should help you if you face them afterward. Naruto scratched his head. Thanks, he said after a moment. If I get into the same situation, I'll try to hit their legs if I can and slow them down for your bugs to catch. Kurenai sighed. I suppose no one can blame you two for that, she said. Then she began gathering up the notes she'd gone through. Both of you take your copies home with you. I'd be very careful about letting anyone else see them, but you should make a point of memorizing all the pertinent details. Shino had already organized his reports neatly into the file, but Naruto had let his papers spread out. He hurriedly began shuffling the papers back together. Sensei, he said after a moment as he got them all together, I almost forgot I needed to ask you something. What is Naruto? Kurenai asked as she stood up and stretched. After a little rest the last few nights, she would have no trouble sleeping tonight. The old pervert was showing me some new moves, and something called summoning technique, Naruto explained. He said I could learn it, but first I had to sign a special contract. He shrugged. You said I should be careful about signing any sort of contract, and to talk to you before I did. Kurenai nodded, even as she sighed. Technically, it would be advantageous for him not to bring this up in front of Shino, but he apparently wasn't capable of regarding his teammates as potential enemies. I've heard of summoning contracts before, she admitted. I understand they can be useful, but are very chakra-intensive. That's why they aren't really covered at the academy. Normally only a can use one effectively. Also, this is something you might want to think over. Normally, I understand that these contracts usually contain an exclusivity clause that would prevent you from signing a contract with a different type of animal in the future. Naruto frowned and looked thoughtful. I presume that Jiraiya has the contract for toads? Kurenai asked. Naruto nodded, and they both jumped as Shino dropped his folder on the floor. Shino quickly bent over and began gathering his papers, shoving them haphazardly into the folder. When he straightened up, Kurenai thought she noticed a slight tremor in his hands. Are you all right? She asked. Shino nodded. Then he turned to Naruto. That would be a very formidable technique. That being the case, I will no doubt be forced to forfeit the match if we meet in the finals. Forfeit? Naruto asked, clearly dismayed. But why? Toads are incredibly voracious insectivores, Shino explained, capable of consuming a significant portion of their own body mass in a single night. If I attempted to use my Kikai around them, I would stand to lose significant portions of my colonies in short order. Even if I were to defeat you, I would be effectively crippled in the process. Oh, Naruto said. However, you should not let that be your sole decision criterion, Shino concluded. As this should remain between you and Kurenai-sensei, I will bid you both good evening. With that, Shino left, and Kurenai wondered if it was her imagination or he was walking a little faster than usual. She shook her head and turned back to Naruto. If you'd like some more information, I'll see what I can find at the library. Naruto shook his head. No way am I signing that scroll now, he declared. Kurenai merely raised an eyebrow and awaited his explanation. The old pervert was showing off when he demonstrated the technique, Naruto began. Some of those toads are really big. I wouldn't dare try using them when we're on a mission. One of them might eat Shino, just to get all his bugs. Kurenai blinked. I see, she said. That was definitely a novel reason not to learn anew. She only hoped Naruto didn't later regret his thoughtfulness. The day of the Chunin examination final matches dawned bright and sunny. Naruto stood in a line with the other competitors as the Hokage made a speech from the Kage's elevated platform welcoming all the spectators. Things had gone well the last couple of weeks. Though disappointed about the contract, Jiraiya had still shown him some cool guy, and Lee had his taijutsu at a level he barely imagined being capable of. Best of all, Hinata wasn't in the damn hospital anymore. After 3 weeks of convalescence, she was released with a long list of exercises she needed to perform. Though the rupture was healed, these exercises were vital to ensure the pulmonary tissues healed without excessive scarring or loss of elasticity. More importantly, since the injury was sustained in the course of her normal duties, Kurenai-sensei directed Hinata to stay at her home until she'd fully recovered. This allowed them to supervise Hinata's rehabilitation and make sure she was fully recovered before returning to active duty. At least, that was the official explanation. Naruto couldn't deny the palpable relief he felt when Hinata told him about Kurenai's offer, but the joy on his friend's face ignited a spark of anger as well. It wasn't right that she should feel this way, that she'd rather train forever and never see her family again. Almost against his will, he felt his eyes cutting over toward Niji, standing beside him. The Hyuga prodigy's face seemed almost inhumanly composed. Naruto knew he'd have to do something about that. After the Hokage was finished, Hate walked out in front of them, looking as sickly as ever. He coughed once before speaking. All right, as most of you know, the rule for these matches is that there aren't really any rules. You fight until you are dead, knocked out, or surrender. Another cough. But if I decide the match is over, it's over. Understood? Naruto wondered if it was his imagination or Hate's glare seemed to fix itself on Niji and Gaara more than the rest of them. Okay, the first match is Uzumaki Naruto and Hyuga Niji, Hate continued. I want the rest of you to go back to the waiting area until your matches are called. The other 6 genin slowly filed off the field. Most of them were expressionless, but Shino and Naruto managed to share a quick nod before the Aburain boy left. The unspoken message was clear to Naruto. Kick Niji's ass. Yumino Irika made his way gingerly through the stands as the competitors gathered on the field. He had no desire to trip and bump into some visiting dignitary. An international incident would not look good on his next performance review at the Konoha Ninja Academy. Normally, he would sit with the academy instructors or the other Chunin and attending the finals. This year found him sitting in more rarefied areas, wearing a fine kimono purchased with some of his recent winnings. Sartorial finery wasn't really his thing, but it was necessary for him to fit in and get close to his targets. It was odd to apply the things he taught to something that most definitely wasn't a mission. Almost reflexively, his fingers brushed across the heavy purse belted to his waist. He didn't normally carry this much money around, and it made him a little nervous. Not only did it contain his winnings from the preliminary round, but Ichiraka Tuchi, Yuhi Kurenai, and a couple of others had added their money to his. He'd even approached Madogai at the end of one of his training sessions. He made sure Naruto wasn't around before mentioning the betting, as he didn't want to put any more pressure on the boy, but he felt he owed Guy an opportunity to profit as well. Guy frowned, thinking for well over a minute, before he regretfully declined. While he appreciated the offer, it didn't feel right to be betting against one of his own students, no matter what had happened before. Irika didn't press the issue, understanding the man's awkwardness. But that didn't stop Rock Lee from catching up with Irika later that day and pressing on him a squirrel-shaped wallet stuffed with you. Listening carefully, Irika's sharp ears located the amused murmurs, the dismissive whispers that guided him to his targets. He glanced around as he took a seat, apparently chosen at random. The rich finery and ostentatiously displayed wealth indicated some were no doubt members of the village council. There were a few lined faces with white eyes that he assumed were Hyuga elders. The 2 youngest-looking Hyugas there were Hayashi and his daughter, Hanabi. The latter seemed to look right through Irika, not recognizing him out of his uniform. Perfect. Smoothing down his kimono with a fussy gesture, Irika said, in a highly accented voice. Well, this match looks interesting. Would anyone care to place a wager or 2 on the outcome? Naruto turned to face his opponent, who gazed back with a slightly superior expression. You look like you want to say something, Niji said in a cold voice. Naruto leaned forward slightly and grinned. Kurenai-sensei told him once that his canine teeth were a little larger than normal, and displaying them to best effect could have an unsettling effect on others. Only that I've been looking forward to this for a month, he snarled. Niji didn't bat an eye. Given our relative capacities, that is a foolish desire. Foolish or not, Naruto said, I will defeat you. He tensed a little as Hate said to start, and he saw Niji's Byakugan activate. You may honestly believe you have a chance against me, Niji said. But I will also see your face when you realize the truth of your situation. You're not the first person to think that, Naruto scoffed, and I doubt you'll be the last. Wherever he is, your father must be very disappointed. That last barb sailed right through Hyuga Niji's icy composure. The veins around his eyes bulged so far Naruto wondered if they might pop. For that, I will kill you, Niji snapped. Naruto shrugged. Hey, at least you have some memories of yours. And I don't take my grief out on someone who shares it. Fool. The last word was pure Shino speaking, but Naruto couldn't quite get the same contemptuous tone his teammate could. Are you two here to fight or talk? Hate interrupted, sounding annoyed. My apologies, Hayate-san, Naruto said lightly. I just wanted Niji-kun to understand exactly why I'm going to beat him like a drum. With that, he formed the familiar ram seal and cried out Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. A dozen clones surrounded Niji, and immediately began to charge at the Hyuga. He spun and dodged, avoiding all the attacks and exploding clones left and right. His Juken is pretty good, isn't it? Naruto asked Hate in a conversational tone. Hate just turned to stare at him. Naruto frowned. Maybe he thought this was a distraction so he could cheat. Then Naruto remembered there were no rules anyway. He shrugged. He's not as graceful as Hinata-chan, but his strikes have more power behind them. He sighed as the last of the clones was dispatched. But Juken isn't everything, is it? With that, Naruto sprang away from Hate, hurling a brace of kunai. Niji dodged them with unerring precision, moving his body just enough to make them miss. Niji responded with his own volley of kunai. Naruto dodged all but one of them. That one he caught and threw back with a mocking smile. Niji moved in, closing the distance. At least you recognize your limitations, he said with a sneer. Everyone is born with a certain degree of talent, and that does not change. Struggling against your fate is futile. You do not have the ability to defeat me, so you do well to keep your distance. Is that what the Hyuga genius thinks? Naruto snarled as he charged. Hinata let out a gasp as she saw Naruto abruptly switch tactics. Kurenai-sensei wasn't sure she was up to watching the finals, but Hinata insisted she was fine. To prove the point, she even performed the prescribed daily breathing exercises 3 times yesterday to show she was fit. The idea of not watching Naruto fight was simply unacceptable. However, watching the match was surprisingly difficult for her. Of course, she wanted Naruto to win, but she also didn't want to see Niji killed. So much had been taken from her cousin it didn't seem right that he lost everything else. But she couldn't ask Naruto to hold back either. Not when she didn't think Niji would hesitate to hurt her teammate. In a way, it was a relief when Naruto insisted she explain about the Hyuga clan. Not only did it give her a warm glow when he insisted there was nothing wrong with her, but it also allowed her to explain about Niji and his resentment of the main family. He'd lost his father to protect her father. Showing anger toward her father simply wasn't safe, not with the seal on Niji's forehead, waiting to be activated. So she was the logical target for his rage. Kurenai, fortunately, hadn't heard her outburst. Sensei's attention was solely focused on the match, which shamed Hinata a little. She knew Kurenai was too disciplined to let random thoughts distract her from things. That was an example she should work harder to meet. You are just as foolish as I thought, Niji said as he ducked under Naruto's kick and countered with a palm strike loaded with chakra. Or are you anxious to meet your fate? Naruto executed a spinning block he perfected sparring with Hinata. His left palm slammed into Niji's forearm, well behind the chakra spike, turning the strike aside. There is no fate but what we make, he replied with a tight grin. Continuing the motion, Naruto spun completely around and his right heel only missed Niji's ribs because the Hyuga genius leapt backward. I learned that one sparring with Hinata, Naruto informed him with a grin. You haven't seen the true power of Juken, sparring with that weakling, Niji sneered. Naruto's fragile rein on his temper cracked with an audible snap. She's not a weakling, asshole! Naruto screamed and charged. His fist grazed Niji's jaw right before a Juken strike speared through his shoulder. Damn it, Naruto growled as he somersaulted backwards. Ignoring the burning agony in his shoulder, he straightened his back at the right moment to launch himself backwards into the air. Niji's follow-up blow struck the uncaring ground, rather than Naruto's spine. Naruto was done playing with this idiot. He hit the weight release catches and arched his back. As his rotation slowed, Naruto abruptly bent at the waist, snapping his arms and legs together and launching the weights like missiles. The momentum they imparted sent his much lighter body flying backward like it had been shot from a cannon. He stuck to the wall using chakra and looked down at the arena floor. Only one of the chakra-enhanced masses struck the target, much to Naruto's disappointment. But that one was enough to send Niji rolling across the arena. The rest had cratered rather impressively into the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust that had Hade coughing again. Niji climbed to his feet, not looking as battered as Naruto might have hoped. Of course, if he wasn't pretty damn good, he never would have beaten Hinata-chan. More tricks? The Hyuga called out angrily. Is that what you learned from my cousin? He sneered. Useless tricks like this? Naruto jumped down to the arena floor. If it was useless, then how did you get knocked on your ass? He asked. He bounced lightly on the balls of his feet. He hadn't taken his weights off in a long time. It felt good. Really good. Time to up the ante. Here's some more tricks, he called out as he threw a wide spread of kunai, each one with an explosive tag attached. Niji's eyes, of course, picked up the tags. Dodging multiple explosions would be damn near impossible. Instead, he raised his arms to shoulder level and began to spin. As he turned, chakra began to stream from his body, expanding outward even as it made him turn faster and faster. Neither Hinata nor Kurenai knew for sure if Niji could perform the Hakushukaten, or Heavenly Spin technique, an all-round defense against attacks. But if he didn't know it already, there was a good chance Hayashi might have taught him in the month of preparation. If nothing else, it would make a strong impression on the rest of the village, Kurenai had reasoned in her notes. Looks like she was right, Naruto thought as he summoned a horde of clones. He sent them against Niji in 4s and 5s. They exploded as soon as they touched the sphere of spinning chakra that surrounded him, but the noise and puffs of smoke were definitely a distraction. Naruto kneeled at the back of the crowd, gathering his chakra. Doton, Yomi Numa! He called out as he slapped his palm against the ground. He must have been a little overexcited, Naruto guessed, because the ground crumbled away even faster than he expected. Most of the remaining clones charged forward as their footing disappeared. The pops as they exploded were almost deafening, but they served their purpose. Naruto watched with growing satisfaction as the Katen began to sink into the softening ground, slowly at first and then faster and faster, as the heavenly spin sent mud flying in every direction and Hyuga Niji's technique screwed himself into the ground. By the time Niji realized what was happening and stopped, he was already 10 feet down. Worse, no longer supported by his chakra emissions, the walls of liquefied mud that surrounded him collapsed. He was abruptly engulfed. Naruto couldn't help but laugh, falling to one knee as he was overcome by the humor of what just happened. So he was caught completely off guard when a Niji-shaped mass of mud erupted from the instant swamp and speared him between the eyes with a Juken strike. The green-clad genin stiffened as his frontal lobes were shredded, destroying most of his higher brain functions. Then he exploded into a cloud of vapor. Niji spun around as a piece of debris disappeared in a puff of smoke, leaving Uzumaki Naruto standing in its place. Naruto's fist dug into Niji's stomach, blowing him backward off his feet. Your eyes can see through, Naruto told him as he stalked toward the Hyuga prodigy, who was now covered in mud, struggling to his knees, missing both his forehead protector and his silly-ass hat. Niji glared as he clutched his stomach. But I showed you what you expected to see. What use are those fancy eyes if you won't use them? Naruto asked. I can see that you've come within range of my divination, Niji snapped, surging to his feet with greater speed than he'd shown a moment ago. Divination field, 64 strikes. Naruto had glimpsed Hinata do something like this once, but she couldn't really explain it or even replicate it when they sparred. Now Naruto got a much better view of it than he really wanted. The Hyuga's hands moved with blinding speed. 2 strikes. And 2 sharp pains registered in Naruto's mind. 4 strikes. And Naruto now felt 4, all on his torso. 8 strikes. And he realized that Niji was hitting his points with unerring precision. 16 strikes. It looked like he was trying to close all of them. 32 strikes. The muddy shinobi shouted as his hands stabbed Naruto like knives, inflicting immense pain even as they deadened everything they touched. 64 strikes. And Naruto flew backwards from the storm of chakra strikes, landing in a heap on the ground. Niji settled back into a ready stance, ignoring the slowly drying mud that dripped from his arms. I have closed all the on your body, he announced, and thus your fate is sealed. This fight is over. Naruto grunted and got his knees under him. Mortifying, isn't it? Niji asked in a contemptuous tone. You are on your knees before a power you cannot defeat, discovering just how truly powerless you really are. Your conviction that working hard will change things is only an illusion. Both for you and my cousin. Up in the stands, the sudden quiet that had fallen after the fight's surprising conclusion made Niji's words audible to Hinata. She was already dismayed by the mastery of advanced Juken technique Niji had demonstrated, and his cruel words only made her feel worse. Now Naruto would know the bitter sting of defeat. Would it change him? Would he blame her? Just thinking those thoughts made something twist deep in her stomach. This wasn't right. She leaned forward, fingers digging into the flesh above her knees, willing Naruto to get up. To win. Is that what you think? Naruto gasped out as he painfully climbed to his feet. He was rewarded with the barest flicker of doubt within the white eyes of the Hyuga genius. Don't you realize this is futile? Niji asked. You're just going to get hurt worse if you continue. Do you think I can just walk away from this after what you did? Naruto demanded. After what I did? Niji shot back. Do you know what they did to me? Niji's normally restrained voice grew rough with uncontrolled emotion. He swiped the mud from his forehead. This seal controls my fate, just as it did my father's. He died in place of the clan leader to keep the peace with Kumo. I know about that, Naruto replied, narrowing his eyes. Hinata's father killed the man who kidnapped her, but is it her fault that happened? Maybe her father should have disabled him instead of killing him. Maybe it would have been better if we went to war with Kumo if they were going to do things like that. But the only thing Hinata has to do with your father or your seal is being born. Naruto straightened and took a deep breath. But you refuse to see the truth of that. So I'm going to have to beat it into you. He let out a harsh cry as he surged his chakra. Uzumaki Naruto was used to reopening his. Doing that was a normal consequence of sparring with Hinata. But he'd never had to open all of them at once. In doing this, he discovered two things. 1. It hurt like hell. Normally, he was used to a small twinge in his chakra coils from the back pressure. This felt more like someone rammed a utility pole through them. The second was that pushing out that much chakra all at once, when it was suddenly released by the point's opening, was pretty noticeable. Hate, who'd been edging closer, obviously wondering if he needed to stop the fight, was bowled over. Niji, who was standing a lot closer, went airborne. Of course, the Hyuga managed to control his descent, landing lightly on his feet. But when he turned to face Naruto, his expression was clearly shocked. That's impossible, he whispered. Fortunately, Naruto could read lips. Just as impossible as fighting against fate, Naruto said as he closed in again, just as impossible as fighting a Juken user hand to hand. Iruka inhaled sharply as he watched Naruto do the impossible. No one could counter the effects of Juken. Avoiding the attacks was the only possible defense. At least up until now. From the choked gasps and sputtering that erupted around him, he didn't think he was alone in that opinion. Is it Dash? One man asked behind him. No, it's not. We'd be able to feel it, a voice answered. That's good, a third one said. No, it's not, the second voice replied. That brat has still trumped our greatest weapon. We can't let him live with that knowledge. Iruka's head spun around so fast he was sure he'd pulled a muscle, but the voices had already cut off. Behind him, he saw a mix of council elders and older Hyugas, some of whom were now glaring at him with a mixture of confusion and hostility. Niji has not been defeated, Hyuga Hayashi said, drawing their attention away from the disguised Chunin. Iruka quickly turned back to the match. Naruto was now intensely grateful for every sparring session with Hinata. It took everything he'd learned, everything they'd practiced to keep up with Hyuga Niji. But that was the point. He was keeping up. The Hyuga genius couldn't seem to hit him squarely, only managing glancing blows every now and then. Of course, the chakra enhancing those blows made them hurt like hell. But Naruto just gritted his teeth and bore it, and slowly the pain would fade. Then Neji made a sweet little hesitating juke that drew Naruto's attention to the wrong side for a moment. In that instant, the feint turned into a full-on Juken strike aimed at Naruto's heart. Desperate, Naruto copied one of Hinata's moves, and bent back sharply at the waist. The powerful Juken strike passed over his now horizontal torso, the chakra spike making the skin of his face tingle. In that instant of surprise as Neji realized his strike had missed, Naruto's hands shot up and clamped around Neji's wrist. His feet left the ground and an instant later slammed squarely into Neji's ribcage. As he heard the air rush out of the Hyuga's lungs in a startled exhalation, Naruto wrenched at the arm he held with all his strength. There was a sickening pop as he wrenched Neji's shoulder out of its socket. Naruto let go almost immediately and rolled to his feet. Neji fell to his knees, his right arm twisted at an odd angle. With his good hand, he hurled a brace of shuriken at Naruto. Naruto dodged all but one of the missiles, and used a kunai to deflect that one skyward. Neji let out a groan as he pulled on his arm, and finally wrenched it back into the socket. The surge of pain almost made him pass out. He blinked and glared at Naruto, who suddenly disappeared, only to be replaced by a familiar-looking shuriken. He looked left and right, slowly mustering the chakra to reactivate his Byakugan. He'd already expended much more of his reserves than he expected to, but nothing about this fight had gone as he expected. He was distracted by motion below him. Why was his shadow growing? His instinct screamed at him to move, so he threw himself to the side as something green slammed into the ground where he'd been kneeling. When the debris settled, there was a small crater, with Uzumaki Naruto on one knee at the bottom of it. His right fist was touching the ground, in the exact center of the crater. He looked up and met Neji's eyes. For an instant, Naruto's eyes flashed purple as he exploded forward. Naruto didn't let up for an instant as he pummeled Neji. His fist snapped the Hyuga's head back, but Naruto was already dropping to the ground to do a foot sweep. Neji's feet were knocked out from under him so hard he was horizontal in midair when a hammer fist strike to his solar plexus slammed him to the ground, and the air burst from his lungs. Neji was gasping for breath as Naruto dragged him to his feet, a handful of Neji's grimy tunic in his left hand. His head lolled loosely on his neck. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Hate opening his mouth to stop the match. He drew back his right hand, the fingers curling into claws and red chakra surging around it like hungry flames. He ripped it across Neji's face as Hate shouted for him to stop. Blood flew across the dirt as Neji was slammed to the ground. He didn't move. The match was over. Author's note. Thanks again to Runzamuk and Bibliophile for vetting this in short order after the last chapter. It's amazing how the words fly when you finally figure out how to make all the pieces fit together. And you can all thank Bibliophile for raising the issue of toads being insect eaters. That Shino freakout scene is for you, Joe. I wish people would do a little digging before they rush to correct me. According to Wikipedia, it's white chrysanthemums that are used for funerals. You even see some at the Sandame's funeral in canon, not yellow. And for the people freaking out because of the events of this chapter, if all you wanted was a rehash of canon, then why are you reading fanfiction? I was surprised by the number of reviews for the last chapter from people distressed that I'm not doing everything just like the original. Some plot elements will be changed by the AU divergence, some will not. But I do have a plan, and I think the majority of you will like it. There is a method to my madness. More AU questions. Hate didn't die because the forewarned Hokage had A and B watching the Sand team pretty carefully. No late-night meetings with Baki for him to stumble into and get pawned. Yes, that was a Terminator quote. It seemed appropriate. As always, my blog has progress meters showing how far I am in the new chapters. And the blog site now has forums for updates, questions, and sneak previews of upcoming chapters. Check out my profile for a link. And now, as promised, the winner to Team 8 Omake Contest number 2. All the entries were quite good, and longer than I anticipated. Kudos to all who participated. You can see all the entries on my forums. With no further ado, I present the winner by Chuji against Yoroi. Damn. I hope Chuji does well, although it is amazing that he and the rest of the rookies got this far. Iruka thought to himself as he followed the other 4 Chunin out of the auditorium. He paused to give one last glance back over his shoulder while standing in the doorway and watched Naruto climb the stairs for a second. Only the 3 lead proctors, the Hokage and the Genin team's instructors would remain in the auditorium with the Genin that were fighting in this preliminary round. Iruka and the 4 proctors he was walking with would join the other junior proctors in a nearby ready room. Iruka looked around the room and sighed as he entered. He was still a little wobbly at times from his injuries, and was surprised to see as many people there. The crowd wasn't going to make his trek across the room any easier. There were easily 2 or 3 dozen ninjas scattered around the room sitting at various tables, and all were intently watching the television screens that were mounted at regular intervals around the room. His eyes widened slightly as he spotted a bar along the wall. That seemed to be a strange addition, but then again to even have an additional elimination round at this stage of the Chunin exam was unusual. There was even an odd bartender standing behind the bar cleaning a glass. Iruka looked at the white-haired man as he stood there. Something about the man was oddly familiar, but Iruka couldn't place him. If anything, the man looked like he belonged more in some high-class establishment with his dark vest and sharply tied bow tie. Iruka thought the bartender's white handlebars mustache was a little over the top, and his glasses made the academy instructor a little uneasy. He couldn't quite figure out what the deal was with the glasses, but he couldn't see the bartender's eyes behind the strange glasses despite the lenses not being dark. Of course, the best available seat was at the bar. Iruka sighed again as he walked over and sat on one of the stools. At least he had an unobstructed view of one of the screens over the bar. "Welcome, what would you like?" the bartender said with a smile. "You wouldn't happen to have any fruit juice, would you?" Iruka replied. "Sure, plenty of everything here. Although plain fruit juice is an odd choice with this crowd. I was recently released from the hospital, gotta hold off on any alcohol for a little while yet." "Ah, that would explain it. Interesting exam this time around. Hard to believe so many Konoha rookies made it this far, isn't it?" the tall man stated as he placed a glass full of fruit juice on the bar in front of Iruka, and nodded to the already started fight on the screen. There were quite a number of exceptional students in the last class. "It's a little odd having a bar and bartender here, isn't it?" Iruka said as he took the glass. His eyes never left the screen. "Old Sarutobi asked me to be here. It was apparently obvious a few days ago that this round was going to happen, and he wanted all of you guys to be served by the best." The strange man started with a smile. Iruka glanced around as he simply nodded to the bartender, and noted there was some betting going on around the room. None of the bettors favored Chuji, but at 3-to-1 odds there were several willing to wager a bit of cash on the young Nakimichi. "Doesn't look too good for the heavy-set kid," the bartender muttered as the fight progressed. Suddenly the sound from the televisions vanished. Iruka thought he heard a very faint shit emanate from the various speakers, but it was so low he could have been mistaken. "I think the heavy-set kid, as you called him, just won the match." Iruka smiled at the bartender's puzzled look. Sure enough, in a surprisingly short time Hate was declaring Chuji the winner and called for the medic needs. The room was relatively quiet for the next round. There were some odd rumors going around concerning the Genin team from Suna. Nobody seemed to actually know anything substantial about the young blonde woman facing Tenten. None of them cared to place any bets against one of their own, at least not when facing a foreign ninja tied to those odd rumors going around. As the 2 young women walked down to the lower floor, the only conversation that seemed to really be going on around the room was how impressed everyone was with the camera crews. It wasn't easy coordinating a few hidden cameras to the television feed well enough to capture the action on the floor well. Granted, they only had the one fight so far to judge, but none of them had any complaints. That conversation died out when someone mentioned that they were pretty sure that blonde Suna Genin was 16 and the younger Chunin were suddenly watching the screen a little more intently. Iruka snorted slightly in amusement at the change in conversation he was hearing. His slight amusement quickly died off as he watched Tenten's first attacks brushed aside as though they were nothing. His eyes widened slightly at how quickly Tenten was defeated, and there was plenty of muttering around the room at the end of the match to match his own surprise at the match. The room's attention switched to the television that always showed a status board. Quickly the names of Abirame, Shino, and Inuzuka Kiba in the room erupted in a flurry of betting. Everyone was betting evenly, and Iruka placed a small bet on Shino. He mused to himself that just a few months ago he likely would have bet on Kiba, but knowing their respective sensei and teammates, Iruka believed that Shino now held the advantage. Kiba and Shino put up the best fight scenes so far, and some of the chunin in the room were actually cheering for whichever genin they had bet on. Still, the match was only a few minutes, and Iruka was tempted to roll his eyes at the reactions a few of his fellow ninja displayed at the sight of the two streams of Kikai that were moving from Kiba and Akamaru to Shino. As the board displayed the next fight, there wasn't any enthusiasm in betting on it. Apparently, the Nara reputation for laziness was rather well known and dampened the betting. Iruka himself didn't bet, and was curious to see if Shikamaru would actually fight, or if he would simply go through a few motions and withdraw. It was hard to tell with Shikamaru. Sometimes he couldn't be motivated to do anything, but occasionally, if there wasn't much effort required, he would rise to the occasion well, sort of anyway. That fight was relatively quick as well. Iruka stared at the screen for a few moments, and wondered how many other people noticed that Shikamaru hadn't even moved from his starting position. Iruka shook his head slightly and slowly at the rather stunning display of laziness, even though it was rather effective in this case. Iruka felt as though a hand of ice suddenly grabbed his heart as he read the next two names. Niji against Hinata. There was simply no way this was going to go well. Once again, the interest in betting died as the crowd of Konoha ninja grew silent, and they all watched the various screens intently. Despite the Hyuga reputation of being the best fighters in the village, actually being able to watch one of the famous clan fights was rare. To be able to see two face off against each other was unprecedented. Factor in Niji's growing reputation as a genius, and the fact that virtually nothing similar was ever said about Hinata effectively killed any betting. Iruka glanced around at several shinobi as they grumbled over the lack of any betting prospects for this fight. So far, only the fight between Shino and Kiba had actually done anything to satisfy the urge to gamble that permeated the room. The room grew quiet as they all listened to Niji basically taunt and insult Hinata. The young man's harsh words caused Iruka to grind his teeth together. As the match really got started, the entire room grew quiet as they all watched. Everyone was stricken by silence at the raw intensity of the two young ninja as they fought. It wasn't long before they all clearly heard Niji as he smiled and told Hinata that she had lost. Although to most everyone watching, it had looked like she was the only one to score any sort of decent hit with that palm strike to Niji's stomach just before he claimed she had lost. Hinata's Byakugan faded, and she pushed up her sleeve to reveal several small chakra burns dotting along her arm. "Whoa," Shiraniganma stated softly. "What?" Kamizuki Izumo asked. "Niji is correct, she's lost. He's shut off her ability to mold chakra. She can't use Jukin, ninjutsu, or probably even won't work for her now. Not that it's likely she knew any that could fool Niji's Byakugan," Genma answered. "But how, when?" Hagin Kotetsu piped in. "It appears that Niji is even more gifted than his reputation made him out to be. We just witnessed a rather impressive example of the Hyuga Jukin. It seems that he managed to strike and close her not only fast enough for us not to see it, but judging by her reaction, possibly fast enough that Hinata didn't realize at first either." "Woe is right," Mizuku added. The fight quickly resumed, much to the surprise of many of the older chunin in the room. It didn't make sense for the young woman to continue fighting at this point, many of them thought. The low muttering going on around the room died away as the fight became even more intense and far more brutal than before. The silence continued, and it was surprisingly obvious that many of the people in the room were watching Niji with disapproval on their faces. Before long it was over, and almost all of the previous looks of disapproval had turned to disgust. "So, any idea what was with the little blonde kid who pulled a kawarimi with that poor girl?" the bartender asked Iruka as the chunin scowled. "They're very good friends," Iruka said softly. He didn't think Naruto was going to take what happened to Hinata well at all. The next fight was announced, and this time the betting returned. Granted, the previous enthusiasm was gone, the last match had left a sour taste in everyone's mouth. Iruka winced as he watched Ino and Sakura walk to the arena floor. This was likely to be a rougher fight than what most would assume by just looking at the girls. As the blonde and pink-haired girls fought, the room began to liven up, and the betting actually began to increase as the fight continued. A few moments later, the room grew quieter as the two unconscious girls were removed from the floor, and the next match was announced. Nobody had bet that the fight would be a draw, and the undertone of irritated muttering returned. Almost everyone was not only upset with the last stalemate, but they were all disappointed over the lack of any betting prospects for this match. After all, who in their right mind would bet on Naruto of all people in a fight against Uchiha Sasuke? Yumino Iruka smiled. So what kind of odds can I get for Naruto? Iruka stated calmly as he pulled a thick envelope out of his vest. For a brief moment almost everyone froze as they all eyed the well-packed bank envelope. That moment didn't last more than maybe a second before there was a mad rush to Iruka. I'll give you 5-1. Suzum Namida called out. I'll give you 8-1. Tobitake Tombo yelled out. 10-1. I know the Uchiha clan well and there's no way that kid can beat a Uchiha, especially Sasuke. Fanino Daikoku called out as he smugly crossed his arms for a moment before quickly pulling out his own wallet. For 5%, I'll hold all the bets, the bartender said with a smile as more and more money appeared. I've got several weeks' pay here and I'll put it all on Naruto. Iruka called out to the room as he put the envelope down onto the bar. Iruka eyed the bartender with a hint of suspicion as the man's hands blurred and Iruka's money was suddenly organized into separate piles coupled with corresponding piles from each person betting against Naruto. The bartender had even managed to somehow tag each pile with the appropriate name of whoever put up their money against Iruka's. Pretty impressive, Iruka said to the white-haired man as he nodded to the well-organized bets. Lots of practice placing bets and making drinks under pressure, the man answered with a broad smile. So how come you didn't help out with any of the earlier betting? Iruka asked as he watched more and more separate piles appear as the crowd flowed up to the bar and each person drifted back after placing their bet. All of that was too spread out, and you're the only one betting on that kid. Trust me, you need a bit of help if you really want to bet all of your money like this and actually find enough people who have the cash on them to make good on 10-1 odds. The man continued as his hands maintained their blurred sorting action. Are you sure you really want to do this? I didn't think you suffered any serious head injuries when those missing nin grabbed Konohamaru. Gunma asked as he sat down next to Iruka. Definitely. What about you, not betting on the Uchiha? Iruka said with a rather large smile. Nope, I think I'll sit this one out. That blonde kid is full of surprises and after the first exam I wouldn't bet against him, certainly not at the odds you're getting anyway. Whatever Kurenai is doing with his training has really changed him. The kid even managed to impress Ibiki for the first part of the exam. Heck, I'm not sure I'd even want to face him now. It's downright unsettling how easily he generates shadow clones. Genma's voice dropped after his first sentence so only Iruka and the bartender actually heard him continue talking. Shadow clones? Isn't that a high level? The bartender asked with sudden interest as he looked at a screen himself. Yeah, Naruto is quite gifted with them despite only being a genin. Gemma here had a run-in with a few clones of Naruto's a few days ago. The room erupted in laughter as Naruto leaped to the auditorium floor and nearly fell on his face. Iruka stole a glance to Genma and was surprised to see a rather calculating smile on the face of the special. Maybe you'd like to place a bet of your own on the kid? The bartender asked Gemma. Nah, I'm good. This just might be Iruka's time to shine. Genma nodded to the screen and the needle in his mouth twitched with his growing smile. There were a couple of snippets of snide muttering as Sasuke taunted Naruto about Hinata. Iruka glanced around and was happy to see that despite those few remarks the majority of the room was frowning at Sasuke's words. Hyade's voice saying begin emanated from the televisions, and the crowd erupted in cheering as they anticipated an easy victory for the Uchiha. The cheering stopped almost instantly as a shocked silence took hold of the room. Exclamations of disbelief began to pop up around the room and Iruka smiled broadly as Naruto gave a dark glare towards the unconscious Uchiha before he turned and began to walk towards the exit. The room was in such a state of shock that most people in the room actually missed the beginning of the last match, and no bets were placed. In short order everyone began watching the match intently though. The Suna genin was using some rather unusual that was like nothing any of them had ever seen before. There was also a lot of interest in seeing Guy's student's ability to mold chakra fights, and the young man's taijutsu skill impressed all of them greatly. Everyone waited a bit after the match before leaving in order to show their respect to the Hokage as he explained the next stage of the exam. 5% I believe you said? Iruka asked with a smile as he began to gather all of his winnings and split off the bartender's take. That's correct. The man smiled as Iruka finished adding to the smaller pile for the bartender. Thanks for that, there was no way I would have been able to make all those bets without you. No problem. That was an interesting kid you were betting on. You don't know half of it, Iruka said with a chuckle as he walked out of the room with a wave. Chapter 17. Haruno Sakura felt her mouth drop open as she watched the medic Nins run out into the arena and carefully place the body of Hyuga Niji onto a stretcher. She barely saw them carry the genin away. Instead, her eyes were fixed on the blood spattered on the ground. Damn, that was cold, Kiba murmured next to her, jolting her out of her shocked reverie. Sasuke grunted. Sakura turned towards her crush, but his eyes were intently fixed on Uzumaki Naruto. Their former classmate appeared to be getting chewed out by Gecko Hate, the referee. Sakura turned to her sensei, who was sitting in the row behind them. He'd allowed them a break from training in order to watch the finals, for which she was very grateful. I never thought Naruto could be so brutal, she said after a moment, hoping Kakashi could explain what they'd just seen. He'd been better about doing that lately. The last month had been very different from their earlier training. During the first team meetings since their elimination in the preliminaries, Kakashi-sensei had said he'd been very disappointed by their poor showing. Sasuke, who'd been silent since the medic Nins fixed his jaw, simply exploded, demanding that Kakashi train them. Kakashi-sensei had claimed that he was allowing them to develop their own skills, but if they couldn't be that responsible, what followed had been the most grueling workout Team 7 had ever undertaken. Since then, every team exercise has been like that. Kakashi-sensei had even started showing up for meetings on time, mostly, and his little orange books had been conspicuously absent. Sakura jumped when Kiba made a disparaging noise. I thought you were the brains of this team, Haruno, he said in a challenging tone. You saw what that jerk did to Hinata. Sakura turned back toward her teammate, since Kakashi-sensei hadn't even acknowledged her question. You think he's still that angry about it? She asked. What she'd seen was so far beyond what she expected from Naruto, it just didn't make sense to her. She's his partner, Kiba replied with a shrug. Sakura felt her eyes bug out at her teammate's insinuation. Hinata is a nice girl, she snapped, slapping the back of Kiba's head. He'd let slip once that his sister did that to him, and it really irritated him. It was Sakura's best weapon for keeping the crude Inuzuka in line. Not like that, Kiba protested, blocking her second sweat. Who has the dirty mind now? He asked with a smirk. Look, she's his teammate, and they train together almost constantly. Akamaru and I run across their sense all the time, especially near the training grounds. How often do you see one without the other during the day? At least before her idiot cousin put her in the hospital. Sakura frowned. Why didn't you say so then? She asked. I meant a partner, like Akamaru, Kiba shot back. If someone deliberately hurt him, I'd kill them. The puppy wrapped around his neck, yipped and licked Kiba's cheek, making him blink. That's why Sasuke's strategy was flawed, Kakashi-sensei said in a contemplative tone. Taunting him did provoke a reaction, but since he couldn't attack Niji, you took his place. Maybe you got off lightly. With that, Kakashi-sensei reached forward and mussed Sasuke's hair, which Sakura knew irritated him to no end. But was that the only reason Sasuke-kun's scowl deepened? Naruto scowled up at Hate. Do you understand? He asked again. One more late hit, and I'll throw you out of here myself. It wasn't a late hit, Naruto said, swallowing his anger. You didn't say anything until after I hit him. You already had him beat, Hate said in a lower voice. That was unnecessary. Naruto narrowed his eyes. Just like before, right? Hate turned and coughed. You aren't making yourself any friends here, Uzumaki, he said, though his voice wasn't as angry. Naruto could hear some angry shouts mixed in with the scattered cheers. If people hated him for beating the Hyuga prodigy, he wasn't sure he cared what they thought. People already hate me for stupid reasons. Nothing I do here today will change that, he replied, shrugging. Hate sighed before raising his voice. Winner, Uzumaki Naruto. As the majority of the stadium erupted in applause, Yumino Iruka turned toward his neighbors in the quietest section of the stands. Well, he said in a cultured voice, I suppose that does make it official, doesn't it? It doesn't matter, one of the older Hyugas snapped. He must have cheated to defeat Niji. That brat could never do that on his own. Therefore, any wagers are void. I say, Iruka protested in a mild tone, will you be asking the Hokage to intervene? Surely he will see justice done. He glanced around to see if anyone reacted to that. Unfortunately, Hyuga Hayashi had left the moment his nephew had been knocked out. Inwardly, he was pleased that they seemed to have forgotten his earlier slip. I have every confidence he will see things our way once this is all over, a fat man in a richly brocaded robe announced. Very well, Irika conceded. If that is the case, I will be sure to return your wagers immediately. Return? The fat man asked. Well, yes, Irika said with a smile. Our wagers are, after all, contingent on the official outcome of the match. At the current time, that outcome is a victory for this Uzumaki ruffian. While I wouldn't dream of doubting your word that justice will prevail for your young Niji, it would be a shocking scandal if those around us thought you were actually reneging on your wagers. No sooner had the words left Irika's lips than several of his companions began glancing around. A few of the workmen and minor merchants near them did seem rather curious as to their lack of reaction to the conclusion of a spectacular match. That was more than enough to fertilize the seed of paranoia he'd planted. In short order, Irika was folding a collection of banknotes, money orders, and what looked like the deed to some sort of shop. Well, I am simply famished, he announced. I think I will make my way to one of the food sellers before the next match begins. If this decision is reversed, you may of course contact me through the Hokage's visitor registry. I am staying with a distant cousin, one Yumino Irika. With that, he made his way through the crowds as the next match was announced. He was a little worried that Naruto might have gone too far with Hyuga Niji, but he accepted that if he had, it was with reason. He'd just shown people the folly of doubting Naruto. He wasn't about to start doing it himself. He just hoped Naruto would accept a really big bowl of ramen in lieu of some cheering. Despite everything that had happened, Naruto was still surprised by the reaction of the spectators as he turned to retrieve his weights. He wasn't completely happy with how the match had gone, but he had won, after all. He just wasn't used to people clapping their hands and cheering. He couldn't remember the last time someone outside his circle of precious people had recognized his efforts. But it felt really good. Recognizing that warm glow, he finally did remember Shino's parents. Mastering his emotions was hard, but he swallowed and reacted the way Hinata had shown him that night. He turned toward the Hokage's box and bowed deeply. Then he turned toward the center of the audience seating and repeated the gesture. The cheers grew even louder, and Naruto found his hands were shaking a little as he pulled his chakra-enhanced weights from where they'd embedded themselves in the ground. Kurenai felt her smile growing wider. She glanced over at Hinata, who appeared rooted in place. Naruto's gracious acknowledgement of the praise could only have one ultimate source, but she didn't think her subordinate recognized that. The girl seemed somewhat disturbed by the brutal conclusion of the match, but she needed to recognize the necessity of what had just happened. She also needed to understand that she did have value, and that what happened to her at the preliminary matches had to have consequences. Kurenai shook her head, even as her hands continued adding to the applause. That was a concern for another day. She wasn't as concerned about Shino's match, but something could still go wrong. Naruto was still adjusting his wrist weights when he made his way back to the examinee's balcony. Did you fulfill all your stated objectives? Shino asked, turning toward him. Naruto nodded. Pretty much. It was difficult to ascertain at long distance, Shino observed, but the damage appeared extensive. Naruto shrugged. I did what I set out to do. Shikamaru glanced back and forth between the two of them. You're not up to something troublesome, are you? He finally asked in a disgusted voice. We are establishing a precedent regarding acceptable behavior towards allies and team members, Shino announced. To that end, we propose to demonstrate a willingness to use any and all means to obtain an equitable response, ranging from coercion, influence, and tactical intelligence, to, as needed, extreme levels of physical violence. Shikamaru rolled his eyes and sighed. How would you feel if someone hurt Ino and put her in the hospital for 3 weeks? Naruto demanded, frowning. Relieved, Shikamaru said, but then let out a grunt when Chuji elbowed him. Okay, that would be troublesome too. But he's her cousin. Do you think the Hyugas are going to like you messing around in their clan's politics? Naruto's eyes narrowed as he regarded the lazy Nara. Despite his demeanor, his classmate was smarter than he normally acted. He probably didn't want his teachers to expect more out of him. That is precisely the point, Shino replied. If we are willing to do that to her cousin, a member of a powerful and highly respected clan with a superior bloodline, then what will we do to someone else? Better if your teammate wasn't so weak she needed you two to protect her, the blonde girl from Suna spat in a disgusted tone. Her expression suggested that she tasted something foul. She's not weak, Naruto snapped, clenching his fists. Even an echo of Niji's words still had the power to enrage him. She's been told that all her life and it's nothing but bullshit. He made himself relax when Shino put a hand on his shoulder. The gesture from his normally reserved teammate was like a bucket of cold water on his anger. It's not weakness that kept Hyuga Hinata on her feet with a collapsed lung and lacerations of the left ventricle, Shino stated. It's not weakness that made her keep getting up to fight an opponent that knew every move of her fighting style, and whom she had no real expectation of defeating. I believe the appropriate descriptor is determination. Naruto was vaguely aware that Shikamaru and Chuji were openly staring at Shino. Maybe they didn't know how badly Hinata had been injured, or maybe it was the undertone of anger in the usually emotionless Aburame's voice. In any event, the coldly analytical burst of killing intent made the Suna girl take a step back even as the face-painted guy stepped forward. If you disrupt the matches, I will kill you all, Gaara said, speaking up for the first time. While the red-headed boy was staring at Naruto when he spoke, the fear on their faces suggested that Gaara's words were directed more towards his teammates. In any event, the two of them pointedly turned their backs on the Konoha genin and joined their brother at the railing. Naruto swallowed. According to the dossiers Kurenai had prepared, all three of the Suna genin were children of the Kazekage. They sure didn't act like siblings as far as he could tell. Not for the first time, he wondered how accurate Hinata's guesses about Gaara's upbringing were. Would he act like that if no one had ever accepted him? He shuddered. Then his attention was drawn toward the arena. The next match, Hate announced, his voice as loud as the wheezy Chunin could probably manage, will be Aburame Shino vs Akimichi Chuji. Naruto turned and gave Shino a quick nod of encouragement. Shino nodded back and turned toward the stairs. Naruto stepped out of Chuji's way as the heavyset boy followed Shino. Then he slowly walked up to join Shikamaru at the railing. To be honest, Naruto wasn't as worried about this match as he might have been. While the Akimichi boy had hurt his preliminary match opponent worse than anyone else, it hadn't really been intentional. The older genin he'd crushed was still recovering and, from what Naruto had heard, Asuma had to talk Chuji out of dropping out of the exam in remorse. To Naruto, it seemed like he'd sort of been asking for it, taunting Chuji like that. But Shino wasn't that stupid, and he never underestimated his opponent. But even if Chuji did surprise him, Naruto knew he wouldn't intentionally try to inflict lasting harm. The same couldn't be said of everyone that still remained, and he found himself watching Gaara again with his peripheral vision. As the boys walked out onto the grounds, Naruto noticed Chuji was strapping some metallic braces to his forearms. He knew from Kurenai-sensei's notes that some Akimichi, including Chuji's father, augmented their impressive physiques with heavier armor than most shinobi. Chuji hadn't started to do so before the exam, but watching Shino's match with Kiba evidently persuaded him to start. Hate appeared to speak quietly to both examinees for a moment. Naruto imagined it was more of the same stop when I tell you to stop stuff. Too bad he hadn't been so cautious in the preliminary matches. Finally, Hate signaled for them to start. To Naruto's surprise, Shino didn't immediately draw his kamas. Instead, he leaped back, putting some distance between himself and the Akimichi. Chuji didn't waste any time, immediately using his meatball tank technique. It seemed to Naruto that he'd been practicing it, because his body morphed into a perfect sphere even faster than it did at the preliminary matches. Naruto frowned. It was also rolling noticeably faster than he remembered. Thus began an extended game of tag, with Chuji chasing Shino around the arena. Shino threw a couple of kunai, but they merely bounced off the rolling juggernaut that their classmate had transformed into. Naruto frowned. He didn't think Shino's bugs could hold on to Chuji in this form either. If weapons bounced off as well, what could Shino do? Naruto's grip on the railing tightened as it looked like Shino was getting maneuvered into a corner. Chuji turned a little tighter than Naruto thought he could, blocking Shino against a couple of small trees. Just as his teammate crouched to leap over them, Chuji put on an unexpected burst of speed and sideswiped him. Naruto inhaled sharply. There was a burst of splinters as Chuji ground the substitution log that took Shino's place into splinters before slamming into the arena wall. The impact made the whole stadium rumble and sent up a huge cloud of dust. When the dust settled, Chuji was sprawled atop the small pile of rubble his technique had gouged out of the arena wall. Shino was calmly standing a short distance away, his hands in his jacket pockets. The crowd had fallen silent, and with effort Naruto could just barely make out their words. That is a very impressive technique, Shino observed. Not impressive enough, Chuji groaned, rolling onto his knees to face his opponent. You were, however, able to sustain it much longer before running out of chakra, Shino said. That's true, Chuji agreed. But then he abruptly jerked to his feet and stepped forward. But I'm not out of chakra. Baika no Jutsu, he shouted, raising his right arm, which ballooned out to a monstrous size. Sorry, Shino, he said quickly as he smashed it down on the transfixed Aburame. Naruto felt his heart skip a beat as the giant fist obliterated his friend, making a large crater in the ground. Shikamaru grunted, sounding annoyed. Then Naruto saw the cloud of Kikai bugs settling on Chuji's arm, swarming up it even as it shrank back to normal size. Chuji swatted at them, but there were too many. A few flying bugs even settled in his hair. His motions became slower and slower as they drained his chakra, until he finally fell to his knees. Shino stepped out from behind one of the trees. Breathing heavily, Chuji managed to gasp out. You got me. Call them off. Shino didn't move, but the Kikai bugs left Chuji's body as quickly as they boarded. Soon they were streaming back under his jacket to return to their nesting places, something which Naruto spent a lot of effort trying to not think about. The crowd had fallen silent at the unexpected conclusion to the match, but the applause started up when Shino helped Chuji to his feet and Hate belatedly declared him the victor. The cheers continued as the boys made their way off the field. When they returned to the examinee's balcony, Naruto was amused to note that while Chuji was eating rapidly to restore his chakra reserves, Shino also held an unopened bag of chips in his hand. Up in the stands, Aburame Misato leaned against her husband's shoulder. He's such a good boy, she cooed. Shibi adjusted his glasses and then nodded. The resolution of this match without unnecessary rancor speaks well regarding his maturity and emotional restraint. It is, however, probably for the best that he was not required to meet the Hyuga we witnessed in the first match. Misato shrugged. It might be better for that thug, but I think it wouldn't hurt Shino at all. You Aburame men are so quiet, it's pretty striking when you get passionate about something. It's about time Shino had a few girls after him. Shibi turned to stare at his wife, eyebrows clearly visible above his glasses. What? She asked with an innocent expression. It worked on me, didn't it? Shibi chose not to answer that question. The other Aburames sitting near them didn't react either. Many of them had heard of Shino's speech before the clan council and decided to attend the finals to see how he performed under a different variety of pressure. But everyone in the clan was familiar with Misato's eccentricities. Kurenai let out a quiet sigh of relief when Shino won. Chuji had performed slightly better than expected, but Shino had allowed for that as well. That was kind of boring, she heard someone say behind her. Yeah, someone else agreed. Not like that first one. That Uzumaki kid really kicked his ass. Yeah, he was definitely out for blood, an older man's voice agreed darkly. A real killer, that one. Kurenai felt her lips compress and glanced over at Hinata. The girl had been visibly upset before, but now she was shocked to see Hinata standing up and turning to face the men behind her. Naruto-kun is no more a killer than any other shinobi, she said, her voice brimming with outrage. Shino-kun and Chuji-san are classmates, and didn't really want to hurt each other. Niji was not like that, so Naruto couldn't be either. As soon as she finished, Hinata appeared to become aware of everyone around them staring at her. She blushed and abruptly sat down. Kurenai gave her genin an approving smile, even as she circulated chakra in her ears to pick up the whispers of those around them. Who was that? I think she's a Hyuga. Like that Niji guy? Yeah, and I think she's teammates with the Uzumaki brat and the bug creep. I wouldn't call him a brat. My cousin says his team saved the Hokage's grandson when he was kidnapped. No kidding? Whether she heard them or not, Hinata's expression didn't change. It was set in determined lines Kurenai hadn't seen for weeks. Kurenai smiled as a knot of tension began to loosen in her stomach. The next match pitted Shikamaru against the Sand Kunoichi, Temari, and it started off as one of the most boring fights Naruto had ever seen. The lazy genius didn't seem too pleased to be fighting a girl, but Naruto thought he'd be even less happy about getting his butt kicked by one. As it was, he took his own sweet time ambling down the stairs to the arena floor. This unwillingness must have been apparent to Temari, because she began to look really annoyed. Hate spoke to them briefly, but Naruto guessed that Shikamaru also must have said something because Temari suddenly looked murderous. The sand kunoichi swung her fan at Shikamaru, making Hate dive backwards to avoid being struck by the follow-through. The chakra-enhanced blast of wind threw up an enormous cloud of dust, but when it settled, there was no sign of her opponent. A couple of minutes later, Naruto finally spotted his classmate. Shikamaru was skulking around the small glade of trees planted in the floor of the arena. Unlike the preliminary matches, the finals were held in an arena with more variable terrain. This made certain tactics possible, like the ones Shikamaru seemed to be intent on using. Temari ground her teeth and stomped, but Naruto knew she wasn't stupid enough to run into the trees. Shikamaru's Kage main technique would grab her before she could do anything. Instead, she paced the area a good distance away from the grove, using her fan whenever she saw Shikamaru step out from behind a tree. Fortunately for the lazy genius, Temari's wind attacks also threw up great clouds of dust from the dry ground, making it difficult for anyone to see where he went when he evaded her blasts. In short, the trees were taking an awful beating, with branches snapped off and strips of bark ripped from their trunks, but Shikamaru managed to avoid serious injury. Temari began to press her attack, moving in closer. However, after one of her blasts, Naruto grinned to see a shadowy tendril emerge from the dust cloud, sliding along the ground toward Temari's feet. Unfortunately, the kunoichi saw it as well and leapt backwards just as Shikamaru's hit the limits of its reach. Temari contemptuously drew a line in the sand with her fan and thereafter refused to get closer, even for a moment. The barrage of wind attacks resumed with no further response from Shikamaru. If it wasn't for the occasional glimpse he saw, Naruto might have wondered if a stray hit had disabled him. After almost half an hour of this, Naruto saw something fly up out of the treetops. It spun as it unfolded, revealing itself to be Shikamaru's jacket, turned into a parachute weighted down with a kunai. Shikamaru's shadow shot out again, much faster and thicker this time. It became thinner as it slowed down, but it reached much further than before. Naruto glanced up at the sun, and realized it was significantly lower in the sky now, extending the shadows of both Shikamaru and the arena walls. Unfortunately, Temari glanced up as well, and saw the improvised parachute just as Shikamaru's tendril touched the parachute's shadow. Boosting itself off of the parachute, it arced toward Temari's feet, but she was already in motion. Leaping backward, Temari swung her fan, getting her whole body into the motion. The parachute was flung away by the stiff wind, foiling Shikamaru's attack even as the backdraft kicked up another cloud of dust. But when the dust cleared, it revealed Temari standing in an unnatural posture. It took only a moment for Naruto to realize that she was aping Shikamaru's stoop-shouldered crouch. As the dust settled, he saw Shikamaru's shadow extending forward from his feet, angling off toward the holes Naruto's weights had left in the ground. The sun was at a sufficiently sharp angle to leave the bottom of them in shadow, and it looked like Shikamaru had used those shadows to boost his own shadow far enough to capture Temari. The kunoichi's face was a mask of chagrin as she straightened up and marched toward Shikamaru, just as he walked toward her. The only difference between them was that she actually held a fan in her hands, while Shikamaru's hands grasped only empty air. When they were about 10 feet apart, Shikamaru peered intently at her, cocking his head to the side. It was odd seeing Temari do the same. The grimace on her face spoke volumes. "I could make you beat yourself unconscious with your fan," Shikamaru said with a sigh, "but that would be far too troublesome. I give up." Shikamaru released his shadow from Temari, turned, and ambled back toward the stairs. Naruto thought he could hear a cricket chirping somewhere. Temari didn't even look at Hate as he reluctantly declared her the winner. Her face a mask of embarrassed fury, she jumped on her fan and rode it directly up to the balcony. Naruto glanced over at the sand genin. Gaara's face was an emotionless mask, but Kankuro was barely suppressing a smirk. But as Temari landed, the massive killing intent she radiated seemed to make him change his mind about saying something. Shuji sidestepped until Shino was between him and the sand team. Naruto frowned for a moment, and then headed down the stairs at a quick trot. He didn't understand what was going on down there, but he didn't think Temari was in any mood to talk. As he suspected, Shikamaru was less than a quarter of the way up the stairs when he met him, ambling along like he was in no particular hurry. Shikamaru frowned when he saw Naruto. Are they making you fight again? I didn't think your next match was for a while yet. Why did you give up? Naruto asked bluntly, taking care not to raise his voice. Shikamaru sighed. It's too troublesome, that's all. Naruto shook his head. No more troublesome than having to take the whole Genin exam over again because you crapped out at the last moment. Shikamaru's eyes narrowed. When did you start thinking about something besides pranks and ramen? He asked. Sensei expects more from me, Naruto answered. And you still haven't answered my question. Shikamaru sighed and slowly resumed his trudge up the stairs. She was holding back. Temari? Naruto asked. No, Amaterasu the Heavenly Empress, Shikamaru replied. Who else would I be talking about besides Temari? Sorry, geez, Naruto apologized, shrugging. Anyway, Shikamaru continued, she wasn't attacking all out today, even when I came close to catching her earlier. She's conserving her strength for some reason, so I decided it might not be a good idea to squander all of mine. Maybe she was saving her chakra for her next match? Naruto asked. He tried to remember who she'd be fighting next. I'm not quite that pathetic, Naruto, Shikamaru replied with a disgusted look. And I did catch her in the end. I don't know if there is something going on, but if there is, I will be ready. Naruto frowned. All right. You tell Chuji and I'll let Shino know. Up in the stands, Sarutobi Asuma scowled. It was official now, both of Kurenai's students have advanced farther than his. He took a drag on his cigarette, knowing it would be the last one he would enjoy for the next couple of months. If Shikamaru had beaten both of her students in the finals, he could have claimed a victory, no matter that Chuji was defeated. He sighed. Getting Kurenai to pose for that swimsuit calendar would have been a major coup. He would even have allowed her to choose a tasteful, conservative suit. The fact that he'd gotten her to do it would have made him the envy of Konohagakure, at least the male half. He shook his head, annoyed at his lazy genius as a student. It didn't make sense. He told Shikamaru that if he forfeited he'd be paired with Ino for every group exercise until the end of the year. Usually, Asuma partnered up with the bossy blonde himself to give the boys a break, something he knew Shikamaru appreciated. So why would? Asuma's frown deepened. He sat up in his seat and tugged on the sides of his vest to straighten it. This also gave his fingers the chance to loosen his trench knives in their scabbards. He glanced across several rows to where Kakashi was sitting and caught the Jonin's eye. Something might be up. He glanced over to where Ino was sitting with her parents. She would be all right there. Too bad Guy hadn't returned to his seat yet. For obvious reasons, the arena had a small but well-equipped infirmary. The nature of shinobi combat was such that immediately life-threatening wounds were always a possibility, so sending the injured across town to the hospital wasn't an option. Two men, one garbed in flowing white, the other in stretchy green, confronted each other in the hallway outside the medical bay. It was fortunate that the room was chakra shielded to aid in performing delicate medical. For if the seals carved into the walls had not been there, the massive killing intent in the hall might have distracted the medics from their urgent work. They are still seeing him, Mato Guy said in a quiet voice. He's lost a lot of blood. Hyuga Hayashi's eyes narrowed marginally. I'm sure you feel quite vindicated after he spurned your assistance this past month. The words were spoken in a calm tone, but the undercurrent of venom was unmistakable. Guy shook his head. No. It was his choice to make. As it will be his choice whether he learns the youthful lesson or not. Lesson? Hayashi inquired in a polite, but cold voice. A minute vertical crease had appeared between his eyebrows. Niji has finally encountered a foe that all of his anger and his bitterness could not defeat, Guy declared. If he takes the correct path and casts aside his past, he will finally be able to stoke the fires of his youth. With every word from Guy, the crease deepened until it began to resemble a drawn-together scar. Enough! Hayashi finally snapped. No more of your drivel! Niji failed today, and has drawn shame to the Hyuga name. He will make amends for this. And if he extracts any of your youthful lessons from this utter failure, I'll activate his seal myself. Hayashi spun toward a nurse who'd stepped out of the clinic to see what all the shouting was about. She froze in place, terrified at being subjected to such massive killing intent. I am to be informed the moment Hyuga Niji regains consciousness, is that clear? It took a moment for the hapless woman to find her voice again. Why yes, Hayashi-sama. She finally stammered. Hayashi spun on his heel and stalked off. Guy quietly cleared his throat, jerking the woman out of her relieved reverie. How is Niji doing? He asked in a quiet voice. By the time Naruto and Shikamaru made it back up the stairs, Shino and Chuji were openly staring at the sand team. Hey, do I look stupid or something? Kankuro demanded belligerently. What's wrong? Naruto asked. Shino turned towards him, but Naruto had a feeling his attention was still focused on the Suna shinobi. Kankuro forfeited as soon as his match with Gaara was announced, he said. Surprised, Naruto turned toward the face-painted ninja. But the boy just shrugged. I know there's no way I can beat Gaara, so it's stupid to even try. Remembering Shikamaru's observations, Naruto began to feel even more uneasy. Yeah, but between this and getting a bye in the preliminaries, aren't you pretty much guaranteed not to be made a chunin? He asked with what he hoped looked like honest confusion. Kankuro's hesitation was slight, but unmistakable. I'm not in any real hurry to advance, he replied in a casual tone. Naruto shook his head in puzzlement. Whatever, he said and went to go stand by his teammate. Suna is up to something, Naruto murmured under his breath as soon as Shino's mask blocked any view they might have had of his lips. I concur, Shino replied. After a quick consultation with the two Kage, Hate returned to the arena floor. The next match will be Uzumaki Naruto and Sabaku no Gaara. Only iron control kept Kurenai's face from betraying any emotion. Despite her unease with this turn of events, she was forced to admit the Hokage probably had his reasons. Gaara had yet to face anyone, and Naruto had the most time to recover from his previous match. Moreover, given his stamina, she had little doubt that her genin was as ready as he would ever be. And if Gaara's aggressive behavior got out of control, he was probably the best equipped to survive it. But that didn't mean she had to like it. Glancing over at her subordinate, it wasn't hard to see the concern on Hinata's face. Given her confidence in Naruto's capabilities, it might have seemed a little out of place. But it was also true that Hinata had encountered Sabaku no Gaara at a time when the bland demeanor shielding his bloodlust was wholly absent. Kurenai felt her unease grow stronger by the second. Iruka fought off a wave of worried nausea as he sat down in the seat Ichiraku Tuchi and his daughter Ayam had saved for him. His rich kimono drew a few odd looks from their neighbors, but he ignored them. A quick nod confirmed that the plan had worked, making Tuchi break out into a wide smile that Iruka did not share. He should have expected Naruto would eventually face Gaara, but he'd hoped it would have been later. Perhaps after the disturbing boy had done something to get himself disqualified. He shook his head. Not that it was likely, given his parentage. But the few hints he'd picked up from Kurenai implied that he wasn't the only one concerned. Who's this red-headed kid he's fighting now? Ayam asked, peering over at Iruka with clear concern. Dangerous, Iruka said. The third Hokage of Konohagakure straightened slightly in his seat, trying to find a posture that would ease the aching in his tired old bones. He glanced over at his fellow Kage, wondering what was going through the man's mind. When Hate appeared before them to consult on the second round of matches, the Kazekage had seemed unusually interested in seeing Naruto pitted against his son. Perhaps he felt that only another could provide an adequate test for his prodigy. Perhaps he wished to make some subtle point regarding the relative strengths of the two allied villages. Perhaps it was a waste of time to try and understand a man who could order an already bound demon to be sealed within his youngest son. This should be a very illuminating contest, the Kazekage murmured. Sarutobi nodded, not trusting his voice. Naruto grinned. He was going to make a point of being extra nice to Aji-san next time he talked to him. He'd much rather fight Gaara than Shino, and volunteering him to fight the Suna was a vote of confidence in his abilities that he wouldn't forget any time soon. Not to mention him being the Kazekage's son. While Gaara made his way toward the stairs, Naruto vaulted over the railing, landing near the entry arch in a deep crouch. Dusting himself off, he ignored the murmurs of the crowd as he made his way over to Hate before Gaara even appeared. He didn't think the weird kid would try anything on the stairs, but better not to take any chances. Are you ready for this? Hate murmured without moving his lips. Naruto gave a short nod. The murmuring of the audience was quite audible. He didn't know if they were talking about his last match or wondering if he was about to get creamed. It didn't really matter though. For once, they weren't ignoring him. For once, everyone was looking at Uzumaki Naruto. It was an odd feeling, especially for a ninja. Was this how the old man felt every day? Was this part of being Hokage? The crowds became louder as Gaara emerged from the archway. Naruto bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, trying to loosen up until Hade gave him a sharp look. In sharp contrast, Gaara stood there as if ignoring everything in the world, except Naruto. His dark-ringed eyes bored into Naruto's. Will you validate my existence? He asked in a dry whisper. Begin, Hade announced, but he was already in midair, leaping back and away from the two combatants. Naruto didn't waste any time. He charged in, attacking as hard and as fast as he could manage. Sand flowed out of the calabash gourd on Gaara's back. It surged around him, blocking every attack, and then reached out to grab Naruto. Naruto darted in and out, trying to get a feel for how fast the sand could move. After a couple of near misses, he leapt backward. Gaara hadn't even moved from the spot he started the fight in. Let's see how fast you are with wet sand, Naruto taunted. Sway-ton, condensation, he cried as he finished the seals, pumping as much chakra into the technique as he could manage without totally disrupting it. A geyser of water roared out of the vortex that formed in front of Naruto's clasped hands. It shot toward Gaara, only to be blocked by the sand. Huge clots of wet sand flew in a spray around the Sunagenin, but as he frowned, the sand shielding him compressed more and more until the water just sprayed off it to little effect. Landing in a crouch, Naruto grinned. The spatters of wet sand were returning to Gaara, but nowhere near as quickly as they normally moved. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, he called out, surrounding his enemy with clones. The clones scattered, throwing kunai and loose stones, dodging back as tendrils of sand lashed out at them. Naruto circled around, dodging like crazy, even using Kawarimi no Jutsu to switch places with his clones to avoid pounding hammers of sand. Every time he got a clear shot, he blasted Gaara with another overloaded Sway-ton fire hose. It was getting harder and harder to do as he leached most of the free moisture from the air and ground of the arena. But it forced Gaara to tie up more and more of his sand into forming a sandstone shell around him to stop the blasts. Finally, Gaara had completely surrounded himself with a sphere of compressed sand that seemed impervious to Naruto's attacks. Kunai glanced off, and any of his clones that wandered too close were impaled on spikes that grew out of the surface. That's when Naruto dropped to the ground a good 10 meters from his foe, and used his trump card against ultimate defenses. Doton, Yomi Numa, he said as he stamped the ground. Funneling the chakra through his leg was good practice. And it looked really cool as well. As before, the ground dropped away in front of him, being converted into swampy mire as all the standing water from his Sway-ton attacks was pulled into the swamp of the underworld technique. Gaara's sphere immediately began to descend into the muck. Sandstone, natural or not, was heavy. As Naruto watched it drop into the mud, a much smaller sphere that looked eerily like an eye appeared on top of Gaara's refuge. It quickly looked left and right in a way that suggested startled panic. Naruto's grin widened. It looked like his guess had paid off. Ultimate defense or not, Gaara still needed to breathe. The stone sphere split apart like an orange peel, wedge-shaped sections peeling back and elongating as they reached toward the edges of Naruto's swamp. Gaara was revealed, standing on the lower half of the stony sphere as it raised itself above the mire. Naruto flashed forward, his weights left on the ground behind him. Charging into Sabaku no Gaara's defenses at anything less than full speed was suicide, so he pushed himself to go as fast as possible. Lee had managed to avoid the sand for a while, even before opening his celestial gates, so Naruto thought the risk was worth it. He cleared half the width of his swamp in a single running leap. Evidently the sand moved slower when compressed, because it didn't immediately grab his foot when he landed and punched Gaara full on in the face. The startled sand shinobi didn't even try to block, and Naruto wondered if he knew any taijutsu. Still, Naruto's fist felt like he punched a tree as Gaara catapulted backward off of the platform. It must have been that stupid final layer of sand that had protected Gaara from Lee's attacks. Naruto leapt clear just as the sand reached for his feet. He'd angled the blow upwards to knock Gaara completely clear of the swamp, and the follow-up kick he'd landed in midair slammed Gaara to the ground well clear of the wisps of sand were already detaching themselves from the remains of Gaara's calabash and reaching towards Naruto. When he landed, he pivoted and ran past Gaara, hammer-fisting the back of his opponent's head as he went. Gaara was catapulted off of his feet, landing even farther from the swamp. Naruto wasn't sure if Gaara's control over his sand grew weaker with distance or not, but getting him farther away from the mass slowly pushing itself out of the swamp seemed like a good idea. Gaara's remaining sand cushioned his landing, so Naruto gave him another fire hose blast from Suiton, condensation. This far away from his previous uses of the technique, it worked much better than the last few times he tried it, and Gaara was sent tumbling. So far, his plan was working perfectly. Kurenai couldn't help but raise her eyebrows at her student's aggressive tactics. Evidently, he was trying to deny Gaara any opportunity to collect himself, and was wearing down his defenses by tying up his sand in various ways. So far, it seemed to be working, but she wondered if Naruto had placed too great a reliance on the information she'd gathered. "Wow, Naruto's really cleaning his clock," Tsuchi said in a low voice. Ayam was biting her knuckle in an attempt to stifle her squeals. Iruka nodded slowly, amazed by how much his one-time problem student had progressed. At the same time, he worried about what he'd overheard earlier. Naruto's enemies would never again assume he was no threat. He just hoped the boy was ready. Naruto's knuckles were throbbing, but Gaara's armor of sand looked more like a jigsaw puzzle. He landed an uppercut under Gaara's jaw that sent a jolt of pain down the length of his forearm. Gaara, however, was lifted off his feet and landed in a heap. Mindful of Hyde's wrath and the fact that this was the Kazekage's son, Naruto paused for a second before kicking him again. "Do you want to stop this, Gaara-san?" he asked. Gaara ignored the question. Instead, he reached with trembling fingers toward his mouth, which was now bleeding freely from a split lip. Blotting the crimson with his fingertips, he pulled his hand back and stared at it. And then screamed. A burst of golden-colored chakra sent Naruto stumbling backwards. Gaara's bloody hand morphed into a monstrous ten appendage far too big for the body it was attached to. It lashed out with shocking speed and sent Naruto flying backwards. Gaara staggered to his feet, his arms slowly returning to normal. Naruto barely saw the shadow forming around him in time to leap clear before a tidal wave of sand engulfed him. He landed awkwardly, still dazed from the blow, and rolled to his feet in time to see Gaara's sand return to him. Up in the stands, people began falling asleep as visions of falling feathers dulled their wits. Kurenai felt the illusionary technique as soon as it began. It wasn't especially hard to resist, but what was surprising was how widespread it seemed to be. Someone with great skill had expended an enormous amount of chakra to envelop the entire stadium in a wide area of sleep compulsion. It was, in fact, so widespread that she couldn't really home in on the source of the technique either. With some pride, she noticed Hinata suppressing her own chakra to shed the effects with almost the same speed as her teacher. Shino's colonies registered the presence of foreign chakra even as he noticed the motion in the stands as the spectators began keeling over. If his assumption was correct and this was the effect, it did not seem to extend downward to the examinee balcony. He turned slightly to examine the Suna shinobi using his peripheral vision. Their body language proclaimed that they were tense and expectant, but not surprised by this turn of events. He twitched his fingers to signal Shikamaru as he ordered both his colonies to attack the sand ninjas. If he was incorrect in his projections, he would deal with the consequences later. Kikai bugs poured out from under his jacket, coating the floor as they surged toward the enemies of Konoha. Sabaka no Gaara weaved unsteadily on his feet, clearly disoriented from the beating he'd just taken. However, he had reclaimed his sand and Naruto knew he was back to square one. His opponent's automatic defense wouldn't likely be affected by any dizziness. Moreover, Naruto had no idea how he'd been knocked back like that. Well, he had an idea, but it was too awful to bear thinking about. If Gaara was as hateful and isolated as Hinata guessed, maybe he'd turn to his demon. Gaara wasn't even paying any attention to him at the moment. He just stood there, staring at the blood on his fingertips and whispering to himself. Naruto took a deep breath and brought his hands together for another Suiton. Even as he was molding his chakra, his attention was diverted by a loud boom as a cloud of smoke enveloped the Kage's balcony. His stomach dropped, but he told himself not to worry. Aji-san wasn't weak, he could take care of himself. As he turned back, Temari and Kankuro leapt down to land on either side of their brother and teammate. They looked like they wanted to steady him, but were afraid of getting too close. He hurt me, Gaara said in a disjointed voice, showing Temari the blood on his fingertips. His eyebrows drew together. He hurt me. Gaara took an unsteady step towards Naruto. Gaara, wait! Temari began, but was cut off when a sand wearing a veil across half of his face landed between them and Naruto. He looked vaguely familiar. Stop this immediately. The mission has started, he said. He turned toward Naruto, and his killing intent spiked. In a flash, Hate appeared next to Naruto. Gone was the harassed, sickly-looking referee, and in his place was a focused. Naruto swallowed. Gaara let out a strangled cry and fell to his knees, holding his head. The sand scowled and turned. What's wrong with him? He asked in a harsh voice. Temari hovered over the red-haired genin with a worried expression. He's dazed. He might have a concussion. The armor of sand protected him from a lot of the damage, but it used up most of his chakra. I don't think he can use it anymore. Idiot, spat the sand, who Naruto now recognized from his briefing as Baki, the sand team's Jonin sensei. I told him to take this seriously. Gaara is the sand's trump card. Get him out of here until he's had time to recover. Then you will resume the mission. Kankuro gingerly helped Gaara to his feet, hauling an arm across his shoulders. What about you, sensei? Temari asked. I will deal with these, he replied, turning back toward Naruto and Hate. You think it will be that easy? Hate asked as another, this one with a needle in his mouth and cloth tied over his hair, landed next to him. Go! Baki ordered, and they leapt out of there just as a pair of kunai thudded into the ground where they'd been standing. Shino and Shikamaru, kunai in their hands, started after them, but Baki turned toward them with murder in his eyes, and they hesitated. Behind them, Naruto could see a tired Chuji puffing toward them, clearly still low on chakra. So, the Senbonchuing said with a lazy grin that never reached his eyes. Is Orochimaru behind this little party? The sound of that name had Naruto baring his teeth. If Sensei was right, he owed that freak the beating of his life. Then his eyes wandered up toward the stands. Everyone was lying down like they were asleep or dead. A few people were up, but all of them were fighting. Sensei. I don't know about that, Baki replied. But none of you are leaving this arena alive. We'll handle this, Naruto, Hate said, stepping between him and Baki. I'm afraid the exam is over now. Right, Genma? The guy with the smirked. Just like old times. Hey, why don't you kids go report to your sensei? I think we're going to need everyone to dance today. Naruto nodded with a grunt. They closed in on each other as the genin left. Iruka ducked under a kunai as it embedded itself in the wall above him. He was able to recognize the and disrupt it before it put him to sleep, but he couldn't remove it from Tuchi or his daughter, or any of the other spectators in their section. He wasn't carrying most of his equipment because of his infiltration mission. The Hyugas might have sensed any weapons and been put on their guard. But the sleeping bodyguard of a fairly prosperous-looking merchant had a short sword he was able to borrow, and he was putting it to good use against shinobi wearing sound Hittite. He heard the explosion and saw the cloud of smoke where the Hokage had been sitting, but he couldn't really spare it any attention. There were enemies right here, threatening helpless civilians from his village. His elaborate kimono bore numerous tears from near misses, and his blade was stained with blood, but he was damned if he was going to abandon them. Iruka dove forward into a roll as two more kunai flew toward him. One nicked his ear, but he ignored the pain as he closed in with a sound ninja that tried to use a substitution technique just an instant too late. The hilt in his hand jolted as he rammed the sword through the ninja's stomach, glancing off the spinal column. Neither Naruto nor Shino wanted to risk getting trapped inside the stairwells. Ignoring their protests, Naruto grabbed Chuji while Shino grabbed the back of Shikamaru's mesh shirt, and they ran up the arena wall to the stands. Seeing all those people laid out and helpless made Naruto's stomach turn, but he concentrated on looking for motion. He saw Konoha, Suna, and Sound Shinobi flash from point to point, accompanied by the clang of metal on metal. He tried to remember exactly where Kurenai-sensei was planning to sit when Shino gestured for them to follow him. the 4 genin cut through 3 sections of seating. Naruto ignored the dead bodies, glad that most of them appeared to be wearing hidden sound insignia. But his stomach flip-flopped when he saw a young girl in civilian clothes with a kunai buried in her stomach, eyes opened in death. She never had a chance. "Are you sure?" Naruto started to ask Shino, but stopped when he saw a shinobi wearing a gray jumpsuit with a mantle made of black and white camouflage material. The Otonin turned toward them, raising a kunai when a tree suddenly sprouted from the stands beside him. In an instant, the tree's limbs reached out and engulfed him, twisting his head around as he thrashed. There was a loud crack and the ninja stopped moving. The tree melted away to reveal Kurenai-sensei with her hands around the man's neck, which she quickly released. As the dead ninja fell to the ground, Hinata stepped around her teacher, her Byakugan active. "That's the last one here, sensei," she reported in a quiet voice. Naruto let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Team 8 is reporting for duty," Shino said, adjusting his glasses. "We appear to have been betrayed by both sound and sand. There was some sort of plan involving Sabaku no Gaara, but it has been derailed by Naruto's action. The sand genin escaped with help from their instructor, who is now fighting 2 Konoha. We were instructed by them to report to you for further orders." Kurenai nodded, and then glanced over at Shikamaru and Shuji. "Yeah, us too," Shikamaru added. "Asuma should have known something was up when I forfeited. Have you seen him around?" Kurenai shook her head and the lazy genin sighed. Turning to Naruto, Kurenai looked at him intently. "Naruto, how are your chakra reserves?" Naruto took a deep breath. He didn't feel very tired, but he wasn't quite as fidgety as normal either. "Good enough, sensei." Kurenai looked out across the stadium. "I don't think any of our forces will be affected, but this is rendering a lot of people helpless and we can't evacuate them all." She turned back toward her genin. "Naruto, I want you to generate a chakra pulse to dispel this for everyone." Naruto nodded and began focusing his chakra. "How far do you want me to push it?" he asked in a tight voice. Kurenai frowned. "I can't tell from here how far this extends. Push it as far as you can." Naruto closed his eyes to focus, trusting his team to protect him while he was concentrating. He brought his hands together as the pressure below his hara became almost unbearable. He opened his eyes just in time to see Hinata quickly shutting off her Byakugan, holding up a hand to shade her eyes against the bright blue glare. "Naruto Majutsu," he growled, feeling his hair stir in an invisible wind, "chakra pulse." Naruto had spent every afternoon of the last 3 weeks working on ninjutsu with Jiraiya, the self-styled toad hermit of Konoha. In between cajoling the old pervert to show him new techniques, Naruto had also been engaging in elaborate exercises to develop his chakra control. It shouldn't have been a surprise to him that this might affect how he performed other techniques. But it was. A shockwave pulsed out in all directions, as visible as a thick pane of glass that refracts the light. Shikamaru and Shuji grunted as it passed through them, while Shino actually winced. Kurenai and Hinata were standing a little further away, and while they didn't react, Hinata did blush heavily. But the most visible reactions were among the sleeping spectators, who immediately flinched and woke. Yumino Iruka was on his last legs. His clothing was torn to rags, he was covered with bruises, cuts, and scrapes, and the sword he'd appropriated had just been knocked out of his hand. The shinobi he'd fought, who was at least upper chunin if not an actual, wasn't looking that much better. But at least he was still armed. Iruka flung a bloodied hunk of what used to be a 5,000 ryu kimono at the Otonin's eyes, but he was too experienced to fall for such a trick. He slashed it out of the air without dropping his guard, cutting off Iruka's escape. Iruka edged back into the corner, warily measuring his opponent's reach with his kunai. He was bracing himself for what would probably be a suicidal rush when a wave of pure chakra passed through him, making him dizzy for a split second. It wasn't enough to distract his opponent, not long enough for him to do anything anyway, but for some reason Iruka felt like he was missing something. The sound ninja shook his head and stepped forward. "Whatever that was, it won't be enough," he said in a cocky voice that made Iruka wish for another weapon. Then the Otonin stiffened, eyes widening even as he pitched forward on his face. A brace of throwing knives protruded from the back of his tunic. Iruka looked up to see the crowd stirring, civilians as well as some shamefaced chunin and genin. A large man stepped forward, and Irika recognized him as the guard he'd borrowed the short sword from. He shook his head at Irika as he kneeled down and wrenched the knives out of the Otonin's back with brutal economy. As the folds of his tunic parted, Irika could see the edge of a Hittite. "I don't suppose you've seen a blade around here, about 3 hands long?" he asked in a gruff voice. Irika was too tired to be embarrassed. Sakura was vastly relieved when she felt the release its hold on those around her. She'd detected it as it was forming, and she and Sasuke had been able to break it. Kiba wasn't so fast, and he and Akamaru had slumped down on the bench. Kakashi-sensei brusquely ordered them both to stay put and guard their teammate while he and Ino's Jonin-sensei fought the sound ninjas that suddenly emerged from the audience. She'd been uncomfortably reminded of their unsuccessful mission to protect Tazuna the bridge builder. Holding a kunai, watching others battle, but knowing if they turned on her she wouldn't last a moment. Something deep inside of her wanted to turn and run from the danger. But she also knew that both Sasuke and her sensei would never truly trust her if she broke now. She'd never be able to look Kiba in the eye if she left him to his fate. So she held her ground and waited for the inevitable. Then a surge of chakra nearly sent her to her knees. There was something familiar about it, but she couldn't really place it. That odd sense of déjà vu was quickly forgotten as the people around her began to wake up, including Kiba and Akamaru. Abruptly, the sound ninja began to withdraw. It was clearly one thing to use superior numbers to face the few elite that resisted the. But it was something else when all the Chunin and Genin joined in as well. Kakashi appeared in front of them as Kiba was standing up again, shaking his head. "Your mission is now to lead the spectators to the emergency shelters," he said with no preamble. "There are a lot of people here from outside the village who won't know where to go. Once you get them there, you will join the guard force until you are relieved. Is that clear?" Gone was the playful cajoling tone he'd used so often. In its place was the voice of an ANBU captain giving orders in an emergency. Sasuke-kun looked rebellious, but didn't object. Sakura let out a sigh of relief. Outside Konoha, teams of sound shinobi were entering the last phases of a very elaborate summoning ritual. Such rituals were necessary to perform a summons that any one of them lacked the requisite chakra to perform. Sitting in precisely delineated positions along and within the summoning circles, they had just unfurled their carefully prepared scrolls when a wave of almost solid chakra passed through the clearing. The delicately chakra-infused summoning diagrams shattered like spun glass smashed with a sledgehammer. The carefully calibrated summoning, designed to call forth one of Manda's oldest offspring, was irrevocably fractured. Instead of summoning a senior envoy of the snake leader, it called forth thousands of his newest spawn. These newborn snakes were barely larger than a finger, too mindless to understand human speech, and extremely irritable after their first summoning. They were also horrifically poisonous. Within 40 seconds every mammal in the clearing was dead. Naruto dropped to his knees, panting for breath. Kurenai could tell he'd put a lot of effort into that technique. Kurenai looked around the Awakening Stadium. "I knew that would be useful someday," she said approvingly. Naruto gave her a tired grin. "While we may have foiled this gambit," Shino said, "I think there is more to their plan than a simple attack." Naruto frowned. "Suna kunoichi tamari," she said something about Gaara being too dizzy and exhausted to use it. Whatever that means, their sensei got really angry when he heard that. He said Gaara was the Sans trump card. Kurenai frowned. This was still potentially dangerous. "Where are they now?" "They got away," Naruto said with a frown. "Their sensei told them to go, and then stayed to block us." Shino cleared his throat. Naruto turned to Shino. "You tagged Gaara?" "No," Shino replied. "My allies refused to go near him." "Damn," Naruto growled, smacking his fist into his palm. "I did, however, tag the other 2 members of his team when they were on the balcony," Shino clarified, straightening his shoulders and shoving his hands into his jacket pockets. "Good work, Shino," Kurenai said. "Finding them quickly without Kakai pheromones would be impossible." "I was merely being proactive based upon cues I received from Naruto," Shino replied evenly. "You're still a sneaky bastard," Naruto said with a weak laugh. "And you freaking rock." "Very well," Kurenai said, thinking for a moment. "Naruto, your strategy against Gaara seemed fairly effective, and it doesn't appear that he's recovered yet. You and Shino take Shikamaru and try to run them down before they can try anything else. Chuji, You seem a little tired, so we will link up with Asuma and any other we meet. Now that I know what to look for, if their user tries to start this again, I should be able to locate them. Are there any questions? The genin shook their heads, Shikamaru perhaps a bit less than enthusiastically. Good. Stay alert and be careful out there, she said. Now go. The three boys quickly made their way to the exit. Even Asuma's laziest student showed some haste. Hinata started after them when Kurenai grabbed her shoulder. Hinata, I don't think you are. They might need my eyes, sensei, Hinata replied, turning toward her. I will not get in their way or slow them down. The girl's face showed an implacable resolve that robbed Kurenai of any desire to stop her. She'd never seen the soft-spoken Hyuga looking so fierce. Then hurry, Hinata, Kurenai ordered. But be careful. Chapter 18. Temari set as hard a pace as she could manage with Gaara as they tried to slip out of Konoha as quickly as possible. Just thinking about needing to slow down for Gaara had her suppressing hysterical laughter. She never had what you could call a normal family life. Her father treated his children like his personal soldiers, lives to be expended furthering his ambitions. Just thinking about her mother's fate drove that point home. Neither of her brothers were anything close to normal, but it said a lot that she had a closer relationship to the one that wore more makeup than she did. Her relationship with Gaara was normally built around fear. Fear of his anger. Fear of inciting his automatic defense to lash out. Fear of being hurt. Her first memory of him was that of a cute baby with strange eyes, but it wasn't until Gaara had killed her uncle that she really understood. The demon inside her brother ruled his existence. Only her loyalty as Asuna Kunoichi prevented her from actively hating her father for what he'd ordered Chiyo-sama to do to her brother as well as to her mother. But that fear had also brought with it a sense of confidence. Sabaka no Gaara was simply unstoppable. In every mission that her team had performed, he'd never even been scratched. As long as she and Kankuro stayed on Gaara's good side, they shared in that strength. With Gaara on their team, they were unbeatable. Until Konoha. The first sign came during the second exam, with the manhandling they'd received from a small horde of fearless clones that overran their ambush as they waited for unsuspecting genin near the tower. There were so many, and they came so fast that the blonde one actually got his hands on Gaara before his sand lashed out and destroyed them all. She never thought she'd see anyone run their knuckles across his scalp like that. Even if he couldn't feel it through his armor of sand, the concept was simply ludicrous. But it was more like a glimpse of things to come. Her match had gone about as well as could be expected. She hadn't had to display any abilities someone couldn't guess from just seeing her battle fan. Kankuro being the odd man out and not having to fight was just a stroke of luck. Gaara's fight was actually the hardest. That weird kid in the green stretchy suit was incredibly fast, and for a while there Gaara hadn't been able to touch him. But eventually the kid had gotten winded and his sensei stopped the match before Gaara could kill him. That only made her brother angrier. She hadn't paid too much attention to the kid whose clone had gone after Gaara outside. He did score the quickest victory in the preliminary matches. But at first, she just thought his opponent had been overrated or hurt. Now she wondered if her twinge of fear hadn't been caused by Gaara's lingering frustration. She was almost looking forward to Gaara's first match in the finals, hoping a little bloodshed would calm him down before they needed to use his other half. It wasn't like it really mattered how many he killed. They'd just as likely die in the attack anyway. She was not going to question the Kazekage's decision to turn on Konoha, and calming Gaara down was something she considered a very good cause. What she hadn't expected to see was her youngest brother getting beaten like an unwanted stepchild. This Uzumaki kid had obviously done his homework during the preceding month. He handled Hyuga like he was nothing, and left him bleeding in the dirt. But she didn't expect to see someone ever fight Gaara so effectively. His attacks tied up most of Gaara's sand, making his automatic defense less and less effective. That swamp summoning had to have been joint level, and with all of the clones he had created, she wondered if he was a ringer inserted into the test to take Gaara out. Had Konoha ferreted out their treacherous alliance with Otogekure? In any event, Uzumaki had really battered Gaara, right through the armor of sand, before her brother could reclaim most of his sand. He'd finally had to draw on Shikaka for a moment to even get some breathing room. Between that and maintaining his armor through that ferocious beating, Gaara's chakra reserves were depleted worse than she could ever remember. Aside from the surprises in the arena, the changes within herself were no less striking. She found she couldn't watch the match with the dispassionate gaze of a professional kunoichi. This was her youngest brother being battered left and right. This was her mother's last child getting punched so hard he was launched backward off his feet. It didn't matter if his demon made him a psychotic killer when he became angry. Or bored. He was still her blood. It was almost a relief when she felt the start, and the creepy bug guy tried to attack them. Watching helplessly galled her more than she wanted to admit. Leaping down into the arena before his bugs could catch her, she'd still been surprised to see Gaara so weak and disoriented. He had actually needed her help to stand up straight. He needed her. She tightened her grip around Gaara's shoulders as they leaped from a rooftop to the outer wall. Kankuro was on point, ready to unleash fully articulated hell on anyone that got in their way, but Konoha's defenders were concentrating on the people leaping into their village, not out. She almost stumbled in surprise when Gaara's hand tightened for a moment on her shoulder. She could sense that his chakra reserves were replenishing moment by moment. Hopefully his head would clear as well. They still had a mission to perform, one vital to the success of the attack. But with respect to Sabaka no Gaara, her fear of him was slowly being counterbalanced by fear for him. Shino was on point, since they were following the scent trails of his bugs. Hinata was right behind him, using her Byakugan to warn of any ambushes. Shikamaru trailed behind her, grumbling at the pace they set, while Naruto brought up the rear, along with half a dozen clones running interference. Normally, he'd have made more, but Shino reminded him that they didn't want to gather too much attention from unknown hostile forces. Not that it stopped him from dropping 20 or 30 clones every time a foreign shinobi even looked at them funny. The extra clones were instructed not to follow them, but to instead help Konoha's defenders. The scattered reports as they were dispelled painted an interesting picture. The Suna guys were tough as hell, but the more numerous sound shinobi didn't seem to be quite as well trained. Taijutsu training aside, he never expected 30 of his clones to be able to disable A, even if they got extremely lucky. The first time it happened, he nearly stumbled when he received the memories. But he couldn't imagine them letting lower-ranked ninja operate alone. Well, even if they did act stupidly, including attacking Konoha like this, he'd still tell Kurenai-sensei about it. Her and Gai-sensei's efforts hadn't been wasted. After the second set of clones had been dispatched to help out a team of Chunin, Shikamaru dropped back for a moment and began talking to the clone in the center of the shifting formation. Naruto, just how many times can you do that before you start running low on chakra? The lazy genin asked. That clone and two others nearby turned their heads along with Naruto. His classmate's tone was thoughtful, but with an undercurrent of worry. I don't know, the clone replied. Naruto decided to let it do the talking, since it was the one Shikamaru addressed. You still can't gauge your own chakra? Shikamaru asked in a disgusted voice. Naruto frowned. His chakra control wasn't that bad. A stray kunai nicked the clone, dispelling it. Receiving its memories, Naruto knew it was just as annoyed as he was by the implication. Turning, he saw another pitched battle between two sound ninjas and an ANBU with long purple hair and a cat mask. Kaige Bunshin no Jutsu. He snarled and 30 clones appeared in his wake, immediately vectoring towards the melee. He turned toward Shikamaru, who was now looking over his shoulder at him. No, it just didn't drain me enough to notice, he said sarcastically. Shikamaru grunted something under his breath that Naruto didn't really want to hear and moved back up in the formation. When they left the stadium, Shino told him to be ready to immobilize any dangerous enemies, and he'd acquiesce to that role with a shrug and a wave. Naruto figured he found this whole situation to be too troublesome for words. Yuzuki Yugao landed a solid kick right on the sound ninja's forehead protector, dropping him like a rock. Spinning towards his partner, she brought her sword around in a wheel cut that had him leaping backwards to avoid evisceration. Striding forward in a deep stance, she was just beginning her follow-up attack when the scrape of metal on stone warned her that the first ninja was only faking. She was pivoting back toward the threat when a third ninja slammed into her, knocking her off her feet. Striking the roof knocked her ANBU mask slightly askew, so she only got a glimpse of the blonde-haired enemy's face before he exploded into a cloud of smoke. An instant later, the wedge of nearly solid sound waves that passed through the Kaige Bunshin slammed into the roof just past her head, sending fragments of clay tiles flying through the air. Yugao rolled to her feet, blade up in a defensive posture, but found both of her opponents fully occupied by over a dozen clones each. The green-clad genin were displaying some impressive taijutsu skills, each one dodging like crazy to avoid being disrupted. At first glance, she had no idea which one was the real one, but she'd take any help she could get. Bringing up her blade for a lunge, she closed in on the one who'd been faking before. He evidently saw her coming out of the corner of his eye, because he spun to avoid the attack, raising the shiny metal devices on his wrists. Only to have two of the clones kick the backs of his knees, pitching him forward to be neatly impaled on her blade. He dropped to his knees, vomiting blood, and slowly toppled backward off her sword. The other sound ninja was taking a beating from the clones, but managed to dispel 6 of them. He didn't see Yugao's leaping strike until it was too late. Turning to the clones, she took a deep breath. Thanks, but who are you? Most of the clones were warily scanning the rooftops around them, but one in the middle folded his arms and announced, in a deep growling voice, "We are Legion." The 2 clones nearest to the speaker both turned to look at him. He shrugged. The one on the left smacked the back of his head and he disappeared in a cloud of smoke. The one on the right just shook his head. Sorry, Anbyu-san. We're clones of Uzumaki Naruto. He assigned us to help you for as long as we last. Yugao blinked. You're all clones? Then where is he? Chasing the Kazekage's children, the clone answered sourly. The Anbu prowled around the edges of an elaborate chakra barrier that had been erected on top of one of the arena buildings. The Hokage and the man who'd been disguised as the Kazekage were both inside, but they had no way through the deadly energy. The only success they'd experienced was when that odd wave of chakra had washed over the roof. The barrier had fluctuated for a moment, thinning out in some areas. A single hole large enough for a person had appeared, but only for a split second. Only one shinobi had been quick enough and near enough to exploit that weakness, one of Ibiki's chunin wearing a proctor uniform. Now the Hokage wasn't alone, but it wasn't enough. Especially since they could now see that his attacker was none other than Orochimaru, his former student. Some ANBU had already gone through the interior of the building, seeking to break through the roof from below. However, the barrier had reinforced the roof substrate with that same deadly energy, which had almost killed the first one to attempt to breach it. The ANBU stationed at the arena were left to prowl around the edge of the barrier like restless wolves, looking for any sign of weakness. The few enemies still within the arena were being dealt with by Konoha genin, chunin, and a couple of. To make things worse for the treacherous enemy, many visiting dignitaries had their own contingents of bodyguards. None of them were very happy about being put to sleep. No, the Hokage's need was greater. He was fighting a deadly enemy and none of them could help. What use would a mere chunin be in such a battle? Things went fairly smoothly for Naruto and his friends until they entered the forest surrounding Konoha. They were barely past the walls before Hinata signaled they had pursuers. Shikamaru offered to hang back to delay them, but Naruto shook his head. Shino, can we afford a couple of minutes? He asked. Shino nodded. We've been steadily gaining. They won't get out of my range that quickly. After a quick whispered consultation, they dropped down to the forest floor, traveled a little further, and then took cover. Naruto got a little worried when 8 Otonins ran into the clearing, but Shikamaru managed to snag all of them with his shadow. It looked like Temari hadn't been the only one holding back earlier. No sooner had they jerked to a halt than the Kikai bugs Shino had spread in the branches above them descended like black ashes. Naruto smiled at the chagrined expressions he could see on what little of their faces were visible. Naruto! Above and right! Hinata's voice snapped like a whip crack. Her normal hesitancy and manners were nowhere to be found. Naruto and his remaining clones were moving before what she'd said even registered. One of Shino's kamas deflected a thrown kunai right before it pierced Shikamaru's head, but a 9th sound ninja was hurtling down out of the canopy behind it. 2 of Naruto's clones were dispelled in midair, not even slowing the man down. But they distracted him just enough for Naruto himself to get a clear shot. His leaping uppercut slammed into the underside of the man's jaw before his feet even touched the ground. His head snapped back as his momentum reversed itself. Naruto channeled his body's rotation into a spinning back kick that drove his heel into the ribcage of the already rising shinobi. There were multiple cracks as the man catapulted backward. His flight was stopped by the tree trunk he impacted with a dull thud. He crumpled to the ground and did not move. Naruto landed in a deep crouch, his feet kicking up dust as he finished his spinning motion. He wondered what Lee would think of his version of Konoha Senpu. One glance at his target, and he was pretty sure he wouldn't be moving anytime soon. Looking back at the rest of the enemy, he saw that Shikamaru hadn't flinched or released any of his victims. Each of them had Kikai bugs crawling across their heads and shoulders, and none of them could even move as long as they were held by Shikamaru's Kagemain no Jutsu. Within 30 seconds of the start of the ambush, they were trembling. At 45 seconds their eyes rolled back in their heads and they slumped in place. Shikamaru released his shadow bind and they collapsed bonelessly to the forest floor. They won't be capable of movement today without medical assistance, Shino said as he recalled his bugs. But they may hold information valuable to Konoha. We should resume our pursuit. Shikamaru shook his head when Hinata offered him the small packet of pills and canteen she fished out of her bag. He sighed as they took to the trees again. That was less troublesome than it should have been, he muttered. But now they will expect us to do things like this all the time, and that is even more troublesome. Naruto snorted. It was nice to see someone keeping their perspective on things. The Sandaime paused to catch his breath. The black uniform he wore under his formal robe seemed to fit a little looser every day, but at least the metal arm guards and kabuto protecting his head were still secure. He'd been able to stop the resurrection of his successor, but Orochimaru had still successfully summoned the first and second Hokages. But just as he had been about to insert the tagged kunai that would bind them to his service, the entire barrier rang like a great bell, going from dark purple to blood red for an instant. In a flash, a blur he barely recognized as Ibiki's newest apprentice managed to breach the barrier. More importantly, his ripped through the prepared tags dangling from the kunai in Orochimaru's hands. Sarutobi's most disappointing student was momentarily caught off guard, but the rage visible on his face when he realized what had happened was gratifying. Sarutobi launched the he'd been building up the chakra for as the boy leaped clear. A grand fireball forced the snake Sannin to leap back as well, but the motionless bodies burned to ash. The old man turned to look at his former student. The second greatest regret of Sandaime's life was allowing Orochimaru to flee Konoha when his crimes were exposed. Some part of him still remembered the boy he had trained, but it died a little more every time rumors of new atrocities reached his ears. The murder and impersonation of the Kazekage was merely the latest, and now he threatened the village Sarutobi loved. Stay clear of this, he murmured to Haku. A strange boy, but one he was glad he'd taken a chance on. I will not allow you to be harmed, Hokage-sama, Haku whispered. Your life will not end before mine. The air chilled around the Chunin as the moisture within the air crystallized. The Hokage shook his head at the boy's stubbornness. Some had questioned the wisdom of allowing Kakashi's prisoner a place within the leaf, but his mercy was being repaid 1,000-fold today. However, he would not allow another person to die for Orochimaru's ambitions. He hefted his battle staff, the alternate form of his summons, Enma the Monkey King, and prepared himself. Temari called for Kankuro to stop when Gaara grabbed her shoulder again. Worried that he was concussed worse than she thought, she carefully landed them both in the nearest clearing. Are you all right? She asked in an urgent whisper. Get away, Gaara murmured. What? She asked. She wondered if it was already starting. Get away! Gaara screamed, roughly shoving her aside. She stumbled back, almost dropping her fan. Then she noticed the shadows landing on the tree limbs overhead, almost obscured by the greenery. Mother wants blood, Gaara rasped, holding his head. Temari edged away from the clearing, following Kankuro. Their original plan was to get far away as soon as Gaara started to use it. Now she was not as assured of Gaara's invincibility. She shook her head when Kankuro tugged on her sleeve. Naruto frowned as he watched Gaara's brother and sister move away from him. Even if they were enemies, it bothered him that they seemed ready to abandon him. He thought again about Hinata's guesses as to why Sabaku no Gaara was so bloodthirsty and shivered a little. To be totally alone, with absolutely no one precious to him? It was with mixed feelings that he saw the fan and puppet users halt at the edge of the clearing. It might make it harder for his team to deal with Gaara, but watching them simply abandon him would be disgusting as well. You have betrayed your village's alliance with Konoha, Shino said, interrupting Naruto's thoughts. Our assignment is to place you under arrest if possible, or terminate you otherwise. Immediate surrender is your most logical option. Gaara screamed again, and Naruto suddenly realized why Temari and Kankuro had moved away from their brother. The sand from his seemingly inexhaustible gourd began to flow out, covering his body in a tan-colored mass that looked disturbingly like flesh, complete with weird blue markings. Already one arm was completely covered with sand, forming a huge misshapen claw way out of proportion to the rest of Gaara's body. But instead of being unbalanced, he shot forward with surprising speed, smashing through the trunk of the tree they were standing on. All four of them scattered, but Naruto leapt down into the clearing. Taking down Gaara was his job. His team would make sure the others didn't interfere. Hinata felt her stomach twist as the air seemed to swell with unnatural chakra and insatiable bloodlust. Gaara was in the midst of some monstrous transformation, and she wasn't sure there was any way they could stop it. Of course, that didn't keep Naruto-kun from trying. Her own hesitancy vanished when she saw Suna Kunoichi angling to take a shot at her teammate with her enormous fan. She wasn't really equipped up for a mission, but she was far from helpless. No Hyuga was ever truly unarmed. Temari leapt aside right before Hinata landed on her, chakra flaring from her hands. "You will not harm Naruto-kun," Hinata snapped in a voice she barely recognized. The older blonde girl's lip curled in annoyance. "Do you really think you can stop me?" Hinata stared at her with her Byakugan, taking in every detail, every nuance of her foe's appearance. She wasn't as good at reading people as she should be, but she was pretty sure Temari was anxious about something, even more than would be normal for combat circumstances. She thought of her father's voice when he was quietly angry with someone, the forbidding but restrained tone. When she spoke, she tried her best to assume that voice. "Naruto will stop Gaara and I will stop you." It was a pathetic attempt, really, but it still made the older girl flinch a little. Kankuro wasn't quite as quick to move in, but neither Shino nor Shikamaru thought he'd abandon his team. A multi-limbed apparition of wood and cloth descended from the trees, angling toward Naruto's back right up until Shikamaru's shadow reached out and captured it. "How long can you restrain his proxy?" Shino asked in a whisper. Shikamaru didn't answer directly, but twitched 3 of his fingers together as sweat began to bead on his forehead. A mass of Shino's bugs descended onto the wooden puppet, intent on rendering it down to sawdust. However, no sooner did they reach it than a small door opened in the side of its chest and dark purple mist spewed out, killing them almost instantly. "Damn, that is one ugly technique," Naruto said as he dodged Gaara's misshapen claw. It slammed down into the forest loam, compressing it nearly a foot. If anything, Gaara moved faster, despite all the extra flesh, and it was spreading out over his body as well. Particularly disturbing was the portion starting to cover his face. One eye had been covered with something sporting a monstrous diamond-shaped pupil. That eye had locked onto him with an alien hunger Naruto could feel in the pit of his stomach. Naruto put his hands together and began creating clones as quickly as he could, even as he leapt backward from another swipe. Growing old, the Sandaime reflected, is not an occupation for the weak. He struggled to regain his breath and glanced around. The canted roof of the arena building looked like a war zone. Craters had been blasted into the tiles, and fragments of scorched clay ground under their feet like gritty ashes. The barrier, however, was still completely unmarked. His former student had planned well, intending their confrontation to occur in such an enclosure meant no one could intervene, as well as limiting his options to disengage. However, that also meant that Orochimaru was similarly limited, even if his arrogance blinded him to that fact. Haku flitted around the periphery, never missing an opportunity to attack or distract Orochimaru. As a near miss made their enemy turn toward the boy, Sarutobi began another technique. Haku barely managed to dodge the summoned snakes that shot out of Orochimaru's sleeves. But the distraction was sufficient to let Sandaime complete his technique without hurrying too much, and the blasted tiles surged upward into a wave that sped toward Orochimaru. Given a little extra time, Sarutobi could select his attacks with care, carefully managing his chakra reserves for maximum effect. The fact that it seemed to infuriate Orochimaru suggested that rushing the old man had been part of his strategy. Foiling this tactic made his rage even more satisfying. This Hokage had put up with enough nonsense. Orochimaru started to counter the modified Doton, but hand seals are a little difficult to complete when you suddenly find needles shooting toward your vital points. With a strangled cry, he threw himself to the side as the tiles exploded where he was standing. He fluidly rolled to his feet, holding his wrist. He yanked out the needle and shot a venomous glance at the Hokage. I see you still need a young boy to keep up with me, he snarled, his voice thick with insinuation. I wonder what your lackeys think of you now. Whatever the years had stolen from the third Hokage's speed, young Haku more than made up for it. The Chunin hadn't pressed the attack so far, more likely out of deference to his superior than any real fear, but Orochimaru seemed to find it increasingly difficult to complete the seals for his techniques. The confined nature of the conflict also limited his ability to complete a technique from cover. But now, icy needles crystallized out of midair around the Chunin and shot toward the Sannin almost too fast to see. In a flash, he was riddled with, falling to the ground with his breathing and heart stopped, only to dissolve into a mass of mud as the substitution technique expired. Orochimaru emerged from a crater in the tiled roof behind them. With a growl of frustration, he drew a straight-bladed sword from his own mouth and charged directly toward Haku. His speed was such that Sarutobi had to push himself to block the strike with his battle staff. That blade is poisoned, Enma growled, opening an eye between Sarutobi's hands. Orochimaru's swordsmanship was much better than Sarutobi remembered, but that was hardly surprising given the time that had passed. The scowling snake Sannin launched a combination of cuts that Sarutobi barely managed to block, though he was forced backward several steps. Haku circled warily, careful to stay out of the blade's reach. His hands blurred together in a series of seals, executed with speed that Sarutobi found surprising in someone so young. With Enma helping, the third blocked a wheel cut with enough force to stagger his foe, and then went on the offensive. Sarutobi ignored the chill in the air that made his facial skin tighten as his young ally formed a dome of ice mirrors around them. A barrier within the barrier, and Orochimaru directly in the middle. Naruto dodged another clumsy but terrifyingly fast lunge from Sabaka no Gaara as he distributed autonomous clones all around the clearing. They'd been useful against Orochimaru, so he hoped they'd work here as well. Even as he prepared, more and more sand flowed over Gaara's body, further transforming him into something out of an expired milk nightmare. One great golden eye rolled crazily in the socket as the misshapen creature flailed around the clearing, smashing anything between it and Naruto. The blonde couldn't help but stare as the monstrous form grew larger by the second. For a moment, Naruto wondered if the missing needs he'd killed had looked at him the same way. He shook his head and leapt to the side as Hinata shouted a warning. There was enough danger here without distracting his friends by acting stupid. For a moment, he wondered how she knew which one was him. Then it hit him. He was the only one making more clones. Idiot. The next batch all mimicked the seals the next time he did Kage Bunshin. Gaara screamed his frustration in a voice loud enough to shake leaves from the trees. He swept his misshapen arm in a circle and the claw of sand detached, shooting out toward Hinata. The nearest clones were only beginning to react when she backflipped out of the way, letting the sand smack harmlessly into the bole of a massive tree. Naruto didn't even have to tell his clones to attack. Hinata was growing increasingly frustrated with her opponent. Temari obviously had extensive training as a distance fighter, and used every bit of that training to maintain the distance between them. In a long-range fight, her Juken was practically useless. Of course, it wasn't all one-sided. Hinata's agility, honed by hours and hours of training, made it almost impossible for Temari to catch her with one of her wind blasts. Unlike her earlier battle with Tenten, now Temari was fighting in a heavily forested area and the Hyuga always had cover available. But Hinata was never so glad of her Hyuga heritage when, right after shouting a warning to Naruto-kun, her eyes helped her track and avoid the sand Gaara had hurled at her. She swallowed heavily when she saw it smash the bark from the tree it struck. You kids are going to get killed if you stick around, Temari shouted at her. Hinata's ears weren't as well trained as her eyes, but, mixed in with the sincerity in the kunoichi's voice, she thought she detected undercurrents of fear and anxiety as well. I am a kunoichi of the leaf, Hinata announced in a chilly formal tone. My sensei has ordered my team to apprehend yours. We will succeed. She hoped the nearby clones were watching. She wouldn't let her team down again. Shikamaru was mostly conserving his chakra. This was something he had a lot of practice doing. Sometimes he'd spend entire days just conserving his chakra. But that didn't stop him from flicking out his shadow every so often to trip up that freaky puppet. After watching the damn thing spew out a cloud of poison gas, either he nor Shino were eager to get too close to the thing. Aburain was pretty adamant about shutting down the puppet master though. He could have sworn the boy was looking to avenge his dead bugs, if the idea wasn't patently absurd. Shino and the puppet were dancing around, leaping from branch to branch, in an exercise that looked far too troublesome for him to join. He knew without guessing that it was just a distraction, while Shino's bugs closed in on the puppet master. On the other hand, they'd also tipped their hand a little on the balcony. A wave of angry Kikai bugs tended to make an impression on people. If Kankuro and Temari hadn't been obviously set to jump the instant that swept the stadium, the bugs might have caught them before they cleared the railing and forestalled this whole troublesome mess. Of course, watching Gaara continue to change out of the corner of his eye, Shikamaru wondered if chasing him out here might have been less of a pain than dealing with him back in Konoha. Despite just missing them, Shino's attack had obviously given Kankuro some warning of what to expect. The puppet user seemed to be moving around a lot himself. Maybe he was keeping an eye out for more bugs. Shikamaru ducked as the puppet suddenly whirled away from Shino and launched a spring-propelled spike right at his head. "Maybe I'd better pay more attention," Shikamaru said with a grunt as he edged away from the melee, looking for any sign of the puppet master. How troublesome. Clones poured out of the trees, swarming toward the steadily growing monster that was Sabaku no Gaara. The body of the Kazekage's son wasn't really visible within the huge mass of sand that was already as tall as the Hokage's tower, but that didn't stop the whole thing from flailing around like a wild animal, knocking down trees in an ever-widening radius. Even weirder were the high-pitched cries echoing from within the mass of sand. The occasional yips didn't sound even remotely human, more like a raccoon or a tanuki. The damn thing looked more and more like one of those odd little raccoon dogs. It was so weird it was almost funny. But that didn't stop it from obliterating the first row of clones to reach it. Naruto ignored the memories of incredible pressure as they expired and circled around behind the monstrosity. 8 kunai with explosive tags made a neat circle as they embedded in the behemoth's back. The massive explosion when they triggered made the still expanding sand tanuki stumble forward, but the crater left in the creature's back was already filling in before Naruto's eyes. A tail almost as large as his apartment building swept out and crushed the trunk of the tree where Naruto was perched. The surprised genin was pitched forward, along with several tons of trees. Some hastily created clones were able to hurl him free of the falling debris, right into the grasp of the sand demon's left forepaw. Hinata screamed when she saw Naruto caught and crushed within Gaara's paw. From the way the clones had acted to save that particular one, she knew it was the real Naruto. Temari obviously wasn't a kunoichi to ignore golden opportunities, because her wind blast caught the distracted Hyuga and slammed her into a tree trunk. Stunned by what she'd seen as much as by the impact, Hinata struggled to her hands and knees as the sand girl moved in to finish her off. A large hunk of wood slammed into the puppet, knocking it off balance and giving Shikamaru time to jump clear. Shino dropped down from above, one of his kama held in both hands, poised to swing down and do as much damage as possible to the wooden puppet while it was off balance. A spike emerged from the puppet's back, shooting out to impale the Abirame. Shino's kama fell from his suddenly lax fingers and stuck in the tree limb with a muted thump. Naruto barely had time to take a breath before the paw closed. As the chakra-controlled sand of Gaara's new body flowed around him, a flash of inspiration struck. As the pressure mounted with frightening speed, he frantically concentrated chakra into the center of his coils. "Fox, if you don't want to die here today, you damn well better help." Kyubi no Kitsune seemed awfully well informed to Naruto. Too knowledgeable by far to not be at least peripherally aware of what was going on around his prison. The surge of red chakra that slammed through his coils only confirmed this. For an instant, his veins felt like they were full of molten steel. Naruto couldn't help but scream as he released the technique, even if sand did start to pour into his mouth. Temari pulled out a kunai as the stunned kunoichi crawled around a tree in a pathetic attempt to avoid her fate. She didn't relish killing, but orders were orders, and her brother. She shook her head and stepped around the trunk. The Hyuga girl was still on all fours. For someone her teammates had defended so fiercely as not being weak, she sure hadn't shown much strength. She shook her head and steeled herself for what she had to do. And then she heard the thing her brother had turned into let out a shrill scream as its left arm exploded. Temari's eyes widened as sand rained down all across the forest. The defeated Hyuga at her feet disappeared in a puff of vapor, and Hyuga Hinata came charging down the tree trunk, her left hand spearing out in a Juken strike. Kankuro grinned under his face paint. One down and one to go. His fingers twitched and one of Karasa's segmented arms looped out, reaching for his other victim. Then the impaled genin on Karasa's back, which looked like a fitting trophy, exploded into a mass of bugs that immediately began burrowing into Kankuro's pride and joy. "What the hell?" he murmured. His eyes glanced back toward the kama stuck in the tree limb. It was still there. Did Abdurrahim's just turn into bugs when they died? An effective tactic to reinforce the illusion of the Kikai Bunshin, a voice proclaimed just as a blinding pain erupted in the side of Kankuro's head. It took an instant before he realized he'd just been clubbed in the head. The Suna genin crumpled forward, allowing himself to fall off the limb where he'd been concealed. A twitch of his fingers in free fall was enough to summon the heavily damaged Karasu to catch him. At the moment, he wasn't capable of finer manipulations, so he sagged to the ground to play for time. "How did you find me? Even if they can smell me, I move every time I see your damn bugs get close." "You are correct in that my allies can track you by scent," the creepy bastard said as he cautiously moved in. "However, the bugs within my body are more than capable of tracking that scent as well, and I can move somewhat faster when the situation calls for it." The lazy bastard that fought Temari landed next to the creepy one and handed him the kama. "Loaning a weapon to your Bunshin was smart," Kankuro admitted as his vision began to clear. "Creepy or not, that bastard hit harder than Temari at her time of the month. When I saw it was solid, I thought I had you." Kankuro blinked away the last of the double images. "Just like you think you have me," he said as he dropped the smoke bomb he'd palmed. The Hokage ducked under a strike that would otherwise have decapitated him. He was starting to wonder if going hand to hand with his much younger student was such a good idea. He was off balance to parry Orochimaru's follow-up backhand cut, but a needle forestalled the attack by protruding from the rogue ninja's elbow. Haku was flashing from mirror to mirror faster than the eye could see, peppering Orochimaru with throwing needles every time he had a clear shot. It was a major distraction, and just enough to keep them on an even footing. Even as Orochimaru yanked out the needle with a snarl, Sarutobi brought in the staff from around at knee level. The snake summoner, his attention momentarily on the supremely annoying Chunin, was an instant too slow dodging backward. With a crunch of bone, he was swept off his feet, sword flying into the air as he landed in a crumpled heap near the edge of the ice mirrors. Sarutobi drew in a ragged breath as he looked around, wary of substitution techniques or other tricks. Orochimaru let out a low groan, but did nothing else. Slowly the old man approached his former student. Naruto spat out the sodden sand as he tumbled through the air. He hadn't expected that to work so well, but he guessed the way the sand wrapped around him magnified the effect of the pulse. Opening his eyes to orient himself, he saw a flash of red atop the beige juggernaut. It was Gaara's hair. The upper half of his body was sticking out of the sand demon's forehead like some kind of reversed pimple. He looked to be dead or asleep, but he was pretty sure Gaara being dead would kill the demon too. So why was he asleep? The rapidly approaching ground jolted him out of his thoughts. He quickly formed another batch of clones, finally beginning to feel a little drained after the countless hordes he'd created, not to mention 2 full-strength chakra pulses. He wondered briefly if this was how everyone else felt all of the time. Why does almost getting killed make me so thoughtful? Naruto wondered as a clone grabbed the sleeve of his jacket and hurled him toward another clone. "Gaara!" a voice screamed from below. Naruto's head pivoted even as another clone caught him and hurled him toward the others waiting on a tree trunk. The blonde Suna Kunoichi ran out into the clearing, ignoring the sand still raining down from the explosion. She stopped and swung her fan behind her, blasting a wind attack back the way she'd come. However, the technique came out very weak. One of her arms didn't seem to be working right and an entire section of her fan had the paper torn out. Then he saw Hinata emerge from the trees, rolling to the side to avoid the attack. She was sweating and breathing heavily, but her eyes were hard as diamonds. Naruto didn't think he'd ever been so proud to be her teammate. Naruto shook his head to clear it as he landed on the side of a tree trunk, hanging there by the chakra in his hands and feet. With them fighting this close to Gaara, he needed to end this quickly. Naruto ran down the bole of the ancient tree, letting gravity accelerate him even more. He saw Shino and Shikamaru chasing a battered wooden puppet out of the corner of his eye, but their presence here only hardened his resolve. The sand demon's wails were trailing off, only to be replaced by shrieks of rage. Behind him, Naruto heard Temari shouting as some of his peripheral clones were drawn into the running battle between her and Hinata. The memories he received as they were dispersed made his stomach hurt. The anguish on the girl's face bothered him, but it wouldn't stop him from killing her brother. Sarutobi stared down at the man who'd once been his hope for the future of Konoha. But that was a long time ago, and now he'd become more of a nightmare. "Are you going to gloat now, old man?" Orochimaru demanded with a sibilant rasp. The bones protruding from his shattered legs were a sickening sight, but a relief as well. He wasn't sure how much longer he could have kept up with him. "I take no pleasure in this," Sarutobi murmured as he hefted his staff. His former student appeared to have also suffered spinal damage from his landing. His left arm was outstretched at his side, only the fingertips twitching. For a moment he considered just taking him prisoner, but he ruthlessly crushed the thought. As long as that genius brain was alive, Orochimaru would be a deadly threat. He raised his battle staff. At least he could give his greatest failure a quick end. An eye popped open on the staff between his hands. "Look out behind you!" Enma shouted. Sarutobi spun. Orochimaru's sword wrenched itself free of the tiles where it had landed and hurtled through the air at him. His eyes barely had time to see this before the view was blocked. Haku was now standing between him and the poisoned blade. When Naruto reached the forest floor, he switched to horizontal travel without slowing. Once he was no longer flirting with freefall, a quick thump to his weight releases sped him up until the greenery at the edges of his vision blurred. He could feel his other chakra, still agitated from the chakra pulse, surging through his coils, seeking release. His fists trembled with a desire to punish Gaara, to beat him senseless for threatening his village, his friends. The reddish tint sliding across his eyes, even as his sense of smell became even more acute, scared Naruto almost as badly as the monster in front of him. The demon inside him was something he could never escape. Gritting his teeth as he closed in on the screaming monster, he forced the red chakra down into his feet, away from his head. Naruto could tell his prisoner didn't like that one bit, and the chakra surged even harder for a moment. But he had more important things to worry about, because he was now running up the side of the giant sand tanuki's ankle, using the extra chakra to maintain traction. The red chakra was actually helping, because he noticed that the sand seemed to absorb a lot more chakra than was normally required to maintain contact on a vertical surface. He hoped he could move quickly enough to reach Gaara before the sand grabbed him. But as he ran up the demon's leg, he noticed that while the sand near him surged toward him, the stuff immediately around his feet stayed still. Still, the sand farther away was reacting to his intrusion, rearing up and arcing forward to crush him like a bug. He poured on the speed as he climbed the bulging torso, past the arm that was still reforming even as it ponderously swung down at him. Naruto changed direction with a sharpness only someone gluing themselves down with chakra could manage, angling toward the opposite shoulder. The whole world seemed to shudder as the demon's arms slammed into its own stomach, yards behind the charging genin. Even as the demon yelled at ear-splitting volumes, Naruto saw the sand ahead of him rearing up like a wave. The sand tsunami crashed down across the monster's chest, but Naruto had changed directions again. He was breathing so hard he couldn't hear anything else, but he finally made it onto the demon's shoulder. But the closer he came to the demon's head, the quicker it seemed to react. Sand began to spring up all around him in grasping tendrils, so he crouched down and leaped upward right before they smashed down on him. Naruto's awkward and hasty jump got him clear of the trap, but now he was airborne and helpless. However, he was also very close to his objective. He arched his back as he carefully molded chakra. Slowly turning in the air, he got a very close look at a face several meters wide, complete with freaky diamond-pupiled eyes that were crossing trying to see him. Then he was past them, drawing closer and closer to the forehead. Naruto completed the seals and then stuck out his arm and braced himself for impact. Raitun, Shakinga Haji. Sarutobi was moving before what he saw was fully registered. His left shoulder smashed into Haku's ribs, the unexpected blow shoving the young Chunin aside. But he was still in the way, and had no time left to use his staff. Moving with a precision he thought he'd lost a decade ago, the Sandaime Hokage brought his right arm up in a picture-perfect inside forearm block just as the sword reached him. Sparks flew from the metal bracer as the poisoned blade was diverted to the side. The metal was heavily scored, but the attack had missed. So noble, even to the end, a voice said behind him, dripping with scorn. He spun to see Orochimaru standing behind him on two perfectly fine legs, swinging the sword he had just caught at the Hokage's head. Fooled by a simple henge, he thought in disgust. With Enna in his left hand, there was no chance of bringing the staff around in time. He got his forearm up in time to block, but this time the blade bit into the damaged metal. He barely felt the cut as the blade pierced the sleeve of his uniform, but the burning agony as the poison seeped into his veins made him gasp. "You're dead already, old man," Orochimaru sneered. "No!" Haku snapped. The Chunin grabbed the Hokage's upper arm and the burning was replaced by numbness as the old man's entire arm was frozen solid. The ice encasing the bracer climbed up the sword and in a flash had enveloped Orochimaru's right hand. His left hand barely let go of the blade before it too was captured. Out of the corner of his eye, Sarutobi could see the boy's face twisted into a rictus of hate. The ice around his arm advanced no further, but it moved steadily up Orochimaru's as he tried to pull free. Still, the Hokage's entire limb had been frozen solid, and the cold began to seep into the rest of his body, draining his flagging energy and making him very, very tired. "Haku?" he said. The fury melted away from the boy's face. "I am sorry, Hokage-sama, but that is the only way I can think of to stop the poison," Haku said in a soft voice. "But the ice on him will advance until it stops his heart." Orochimaru tugged harder, pulling both of them forward. Despite his frantic efforts, they were still joined together as the ice passed his elbow and moved toward his shoulder. "Let me go, you freak!" he hissed. "For attacking my Hokage, you will die," Haku said, his soft voice as implacable as any Sarutobi could remember. With a snarl of frustration, Orochimaru raised his free hand and smashed it down on his frozen forearm. It shattered into grisly chunks, as did the sword. The snake summoner leapt back as the barrier suddenly flickered and died. Four shadowy figures leapt in from the corners as the ANBU just started moving. Haku moved to guard the Hokage, who was sinking to his knees and beginning to shake, but all four of them converged on Orochimaru. Sarutobi lost sight of them as the ANBU moved in. He thought he saw them leap away with ANBU in pursuit, but his vision was getting cloudy. He blinked as one of the masked shinobi angrily demanded that Haku explain himself. "The arm was poisoned," the Hokage said in a shaky voice. "Orochimaru wouldn't use any venom that has an antidote." He coughed and shivered again. "It will have to come off." The day seemed to be getting darker, but Sarutobi knew better. He hoped things were going better elsewhere in the village he loved. If the situation wasn't so deadly, Naruto would have laughed out loud. Sabaka no Gaara, demon container and terror of the sands, was now wide awake. To go with his wide eyes, his short red hair was now standing completely on end. It was even worse than Hinata's had been, that time they'd sparred. Of course, Naruto had a clear view of this since one arm was wrapped tightly around Gaara's shoulders and the other was holding a kunai up to his right eyeball. Despairing wails from the demon below nearly shattered his eardrums, but they also told him that waking up Gaara had been a smart move. The mass of sand below them seemed to be softening, losing cohesion, even as it reared up to crush the green-clad genin. His legs were already enveloped. "Don't even think about it," Naruto snapped. "Unless you think you can kill me before I push this through your eye. No sand there to stop it." It was a calculated risk. He wasn't sure that even the threat of instant death would deter the crazy. But the sand stopped rising, for the moment at least. He could also feel the mass below them trembling as the demon let out a mournful sigh at a deafening volume. What he wasn't prepared for was Gaara's dark-ringed eyes to focus past the kunai and lock onto his own. "Why haven't you killed me?" he asked in an eerily calm voice. "My existence has no meaning." The utterly emotionless way the question was asked made Naruto's stomach turn over. He remembered Hinata wondering what it would be like if he'd been raised with no one who cared about him, no one precious to him. If he'd been raised as a weapon, like it seems Gaara was. For an instant, Naruto was struck by a thunderbolt of déjà vu. This was not right. He remembered sitting by Hinata's bed at the hospital, hearing her describe her family. This was wrong, and he had to fix it. Somehow. The sand was still losing cohesion, But Naruto was more concerned about Gaara. The empty teal eyes were looking past the kunai, focusing on him now. If he decided that Naruto lacked the will to kill him. Naruto blinked as he received the memories of another clone. This one had been helping Hinata with the fan user, Temari, the one Sensei's dossier identified as Gaara's sister. His clone had been caught on the edge of a wind blast, but before he dispersed, he'd gotten a good look at the kunoichi. She was trying desperately to get past Hinata and into the clearing, even though she moved like she'd taken more than a couple of juken hits. Even as he saw Gaara's eyes take on a calculating look, Naruto scowled and snapped, "Idiot." Gaara blinked. "You say your existence has no meaning?" Naruto snarled, "Then why the hell are your brother and sister trying so hard to save you?" The look on Gaara's face was so bewildered that Naruto felt a little sick inside, but he didn't let that show on his face. "Your sister can't even move one of her arms, and she's still trying to get past my teammate." He grimaced. "She's crying and screaming your name, you idiot. And your brother is facing 2-to-1 odds as well. Maybe you don't think your existence has any meaning, but they sure as hell do. And they're going to get killed if we keep this up much longer." The Tsunagenin, whose hair was finally returning to normal, leaned forward, totally ignoring Naruto's kunai. "She's crying?" he asked, his hollow voice a little less remote than before. "She never cries." "Well, she is now," Naruto snapped, pulling back the kunai before the oblivious demon container hurt himself. "She obviously cares about what happens to you, even if you don't. Are you going to get her killed?" Gaara's eyes focused again on Naruto's, with an intensity he found really creepy. "You won't hesitate to kill me, will you?" "Not if it will keep my friends safe," Naruto replied, his voice cracking despite his best efforts. "Then why did you stop just now?" "Because," Naruto's voice trailed off. "Because you're like me. Or what I'd be like if I didn't have my friends. One of them pointed that out to me. I had a chance to give you a choice, so I did." Gaara stared at him for a long moment, and Naruto tightened his grip around the kunai. Then the Tsunagenin slowly nodded. The sand moved away from them both, releasing Naruto's legs, and slowly lowered them to the ground. When they reached the ground, most of the sand dispersed while the rest moved to reform the calabash on Gaara's back. Naruto warily released his hold on Gaara and pocketed his kunai. The other battles around the clearing had slowly ground to a halt while this was happening, so it was mostly silent when Gaara raised his voice. "Our mission has ended. Thanks for watching. I hope you had as much fun as I did putting this epic what if together. Make sure to smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a single twist in the story. Drop your thoughts, theories, or even wild ideas in the comments. I read every single one. And hey, if you're craving more awesome Naruto content, go check out the other videos on the channel. I've got plenty of heat waiting for you. Until next time, stay sharp, stay awesome, and remember, even a shadow clone needs love. Peace out.